Did you all hear that?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Shani. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Sunnyvale City Hall. Thanks to the mayor for hosting us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And as I said to Consuelo, who's one of our guest speakers today, I shared with her that we normally have the meeting in Los Altos, but we made an exception to have it here in Sunnyvale. So it's a little bit different. I know everybody's adjusting to the new place, but thank you all for making the trip to Sunnyvale. And thanks again, Larry, for hosting. With that, I will call the meeting to order at 7:05 p.m. Shali, can you please take the roll call?
Yes. Ann Bybee? Or Sergio Lopez?
Here.
Okay. Sheila Mohan?
Here.
Nisa Fliger?
Here.
Stanley Mock? Here, okay. Matthew Hudes?
Here.
Oh,
Well,
perfect timing. Carmen Montano?
Here.
Javid Elahi?
present.
Mark Turner?
Here.
Margaret Abekoga? Or Pat Showalter? Nope. Okay.
Pat left, but I thought that.
Oh, there's Margaret.
Margaret's coming. She's
Okay.
coming.
All right, I'll come back to Mountain View. Greer Stone? Rosemary Kamei?
Here.
Kathy Watanabe?
Here.
Tina Walia?
Here.
Larry Klein?
Here.
Margaret Abekoga? Great, we have 13 out of 14 present.
Great. Thanks, Shali, and thank you all again so much for making the time. We'll move to public comment on non-agendized items. Do we have anybody in the room or online who would like to make a comment on non-agendized items?
Can I make one? I'd just like to say thank you. For someone who drives 45 minutes each month to go to Los Altos, this is beautiful. 30-minute drive is like, wow, that's great.
Thank you,
And I
Mayor.
move that we
Thank
bring
you.
every meeting.
Thank
Am
you.
I overstepping my bounds?
Any other comments, Shali?
No members of the public online have their hands raised.
Oh, thank you. So let's move to the agenda. The first agenda item is our consent item, and the only item we have for today's meeting is our minutes from our board meeting on March 14th, 2024. Do we have any questions or comments on these minutes? And if not, we'll entertain a motion.
I think Sheila Mohan was present for this.
Yes.
Last time, not JR, but JR was there for the LAC meeting. I just want to make that correction.
And I did let Shani know.
With that, I'd like to make a motion to move forward.
Second by Klein.
Thank you. So we have a motion by Walia, seconded by Klein. Do we have any public comment on this item?
No comments online.
Thank you. And with that, Shali, we can take the vote.
Okay, so motion to approve the minutes from the March 14th, 2024 meeting with the correction that we will add Mayor Mohan's name and take out Vice Mayor Bruin's name in the attendance by Walia, second by Klein. Campbell?
And Johnny or General Counsel online, everybody's present in the room. Do we need to do a roll call vote? Or can
No,
we
you
just-
don't.
Oh, okay.
What's his name was in San Jose.
Yeah, I heard that's.
Okay, go ahead. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously. So move it quickly. Thank you. All right, so next President's update, and I'll be quick as well. We have two substantive items that we're all looking forward to. The first update is please save the date, June 13th, for our first social event of the year. We're working on a topic and also getting speakers, and we'll share more information about the event at our May meeting. But I want to make sure that everybody has it on their calendar. It's the normal meeting time. So it's the normal second Thursday, June 13th, but it's a social event. It will be in Los Altos. I think our LAC chair still plans to have a LAC meeting on June 13th at 5:30. And so if you're a LAC representative, you'll still need to do work and go to the LAC meeting. And then join us at 7 for the social event, and we'll send an email and give you more information as it develops. So please put that on your calendars. The second update, Cal Cities Leaders Summit is next week. I know several of you are signed up to attend. It's really great when we have a strong presence from Santa Clara County. And I know Cal Cities has lined up many meetings with representatives there, both on the Wednesday and Thursday of the event. So I look forward to seeing many of you there. I know Sergio will be there as well. And then on the bylaws, we're moving forward with our JPA. As you know, we established our JPA at the beginning of February, but we still needed to do a couple things to make it formal. And one of them is our bylaws. The deadline to provide your feedback and comments on these bylaws is tomorrow, April 12th. So, I hope many of your cities have already submitted comments, but just in case you haven't, please send Shali an email with your feedback and comments by 5 p.m. tomorrow. And then, as you know, with the timeline, the executive committee will review your comments, put together a draft, and then bring it to the next board meeting in May for review and approval. And then the last thing I'll do, I'll introduce Anthony Carneseca, who is standing in for the Los Altos City Manager, Gabe England. Anthony is assistant to our city manager in Los Altos, and so he's our city manager representative today. And so thanks again. Any questions, public comment on the president's update? Shali, any public comment?
No public comment online.
Thank you. And next, we will move to, I know a lot of you are looking forward to this item. It's the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority update for the November 2024 Affordable Housing General Obligation Bond measure. We have two guest speakers. We have Daniel Saver and Consuelo Hernandez. And as they get ready, I don't know if they'll be speaking. They're here at the table. I gave them the option of going in front of us and presenting, or if they want to stay seated, that's also fine. I don't know if they have a preference. I do have breaking news that I want to share before they start their presentation, and I'm sure Dan was going to announce it. So as many of you know, I am your representative on the ABAG Executive Board, but I'm also a committee member on the ABAG Housing Committee. And there's also the BAFA Committee, which Margaret serves on. And we have been, I guess, the vetting committee for this BAFA bond, where we've made a lot of recommendation to both the BAFA board and the ABAG executive board on positions we should take as we move this bond forward. Yesterday, when the BAFA committee, Margaret and Cindy Chavez serve on that committee, and I'm on the ABAG housing committee, we met yesterday, and I think it was unanimous, but it definitely majority, it was unanimous, Margaret. We unanimously recommended, and there are different sub-elements of the recommendation, which I'm sure Dan may cover, but we unanimously recommended to the ABAG Executive Board, which will vote next week, and also to the BAFA Board, that they should approve putting this measure on the ballot. And your representatives, Cindy Chavez, Margaret, and myself, who are on these two committees, also supported this recommendation. So I thought it was important to give that late breaking news so everybody's up to speed on where we are as a county. I do have bios for Consuelo and Danielle. I'll start with, and I'm pulling it up as I speak, but I'll start with Consuelo, who I've known at the county in different positions. And she's currently the director of the Affordable Housing, the Office of Supportive Housing in Santa Clara County. The bio isn't coming up, but your internet isn't working with me here, Larry. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So and Daniel Saver, he's also with ABAG. He's ABAG MTC staff. Okay, here's Consuelo's bio. So as the director of the Office of Supporting Housing, Consuelo's team works to support the county's mission of promoting a healthy, safe, and prosperous community by ending and preventing homelessness. In her role, Consuelo has overseen the implementation and administration of the county's $950 million affordable housing bond, very relevant experience, and other housing development programs. coordinated the county-wide network of supportive housing programs, and directed the lead agency for the local continuum of care. As a result of this work, since 2015, the county and its partners have helped nearly 25,000 homeless adults, families, and children move into permanent housing and have expanded the number of new supportive housing units by approximately 3,000. She was born and raised in Southern California, earned her bachelor's degree in art history and Chicano studies from UC Santa Barbara, and has a master's in urban planning with a concentration in economic development from the University of Southern California, and a master's of arts in public administration with a concentration in local government finance from the University of Southern California. And I'll introduce Daniel. Who's going first? Are you starting?
Me first.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as I said, Danielle, and I'm basically ad-libbing right now till his bio comes up, and I'll turn it over to them. He is, on the ABAG MTC staff. He's one of the lead employees at ABAG MTC on this fund, and has played a key role in other housing measures and work that ABAG and MTC have worked on together for our counties and the broader 9 Bay Area county region. He is Assistant Director for Housing and Local Planning at MTC, where he has overseen the expansion of the agency's housing-related efforts. This has included planning, technical assistance, and policy development activities across the 3 Ps of housing, which are protection, preservation, and production. In this role, he has helped to launch the BOFA, as well as the award-winning Regional Housing Technical Assistant Program, which has supported all 109 Bay Area jurisdictions to develop and implement their housing elements. Prior to joining MTC, he was a housing attorney at Community Legal Services in East Palo Alto. Did not know that, Daniel. And before that, he served as a judicial clerk on the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. He holds a JD from Harvard Law and a BA from UC Berkeley. And with that, thank you both for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for having me. Thank you very much for inviting us to speak with all of you. It's great to see some of my board members and commissioners here. Apologies to those of you who have actually seen some of these slides, or board members have seen versions of this. I am Daniel Saber. I'm the Assistant Director for Housing and Local Planning at MTC and ABAG. As I'll get into in just a minute, we are the 2 agencies that together co-lead all of the work under the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. And I'm here to talk to you about the Regional Affordable Housing Bond, which our boards have instructed us to move forward with placing on the November 2024 ballot. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So you may be asking yourself, what is this new regional entity with an acronym that sounds weird? How did this come onto the scene? Even though our name is strange and hard to get your brain wrapped around, the work that undergirds this regional housing bond has been going on for a number of years. So starting back in 2017, there was a group of local elected officials on both of our boards, ABAG as well as MTC, as well as a lot of local stakeholders who started getting together to talk about what we could do at a regional scale to try to tackle our region's longstanding chronic affordable housing challenges. And the idea was that one-on-one, we have 109 jurisdictions in the Bay Area, each trying to tackle this issue, felt in different ways, different communities, but felt nonetheless everywhere. But expecting any one jurisdiction to solve this problem on its own was not resulting in the kind of changes that we would like to see in our community. And one of the most noted obstacles blocking progress on this issue across the entire 9-county region was the need for additional funding, particularly for affordable housing. And so in 2019, all of that work culminated in a partnership with the state legislature to have a bill passed to actually create this new housing finance agency. So BOFA is a creature of state statute, which I'll talk about in a minute because that has a lot of relevance for the authority and the rules that would apply to the bond. So if we go to the next slide. So a little bit more about BOFA. It is the agency leading this bond proposal, but working very closely with the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG. So really, and I should note at the outset, BAFA, the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority, is comprised of the same members as the MTC Commission. So Commissioner Abby Koga serves on the MTC, but by virtue of the fact that she is on MTC, she also is a member of the BAFA board. And for critical decisions, such as whether or not to place a revenue measure on the ballot, ABAG and BAFA most both act in order for the bond to move forward. BAFA is the first regional housing finance agency in the state of California. Actually, since we've been created, there's now a sister agency in LA, though it actually only spans one county, whereas we are 9, so still somewhat unique in terms of being a multi-county agency. And the mission is to address affordable housing at scale across the entire region. BAFA was formed through work led by our local government officials, and partnership with local governments is key to the DNA of BAFA and the way that we expect to be able to do our work. And one of the key powers that BAFA has is the ability to raise revenue. So it was created as a direct response to that regionally recognized need that we need more money for affordable housing everywhere in every community. Let's go into the next slide. So a quick primer, what is this proposed regional housing bond? It is a bond of up to $20 billion. The boards have been considering $10 and $20 billion. At $20 billion, the bond is estimated to produce and preserve an estimated 72,000 units across the Bay Area. The bond would require voter approval, and many of the eligible uses are set forth in the statute. We are a creature of state law, and therefore state law governs a lot of the rules about how the money gets spent. More details on that soon, and Consuelo will be picking up that point as well. You see from the numbers here, this is by far the most ambitious housing program in the history of the Bay Area. This scale of resources has never been raised. In fact, there has never been a housing bond this large anywhere in the state for the state of California. If you look at prior state housing bonds, they've been in the single digits. To our knowledge, there's not even been a national side or anywhere across the nation a bond of this scale. So we are really talking about trying to lead here in the Bay Area and address this problem with the level of resources that are truly needed to make a dent. So let's move to the next slide. Within BAFA's statute, if we choose to move forward with a bond, a key feature of how BAFA will be working with our local government partners is that at the outset, the bond has this, what we call the 80-20 split. So 80% of the funds raised through the bond go directly back to the counties and several cities that receive direct allocations for those jurisdictions to administer. So BAFA is not administering those dollars. The county will have dollars, and here in Santa Clara County, the city of San Jose is also eligible for a direct allocation. And so money will flow to all counties, as well as a couple of cities, and then 20% of the funds that are raised are retained by BAFA in order to come up with regional scale programs that will benefit every single county across the 9-county Bay Area. So the idea is not like, that's not overhead. That's actual money for additional housing programs that will be invested in each county. We're at the part of this now where we are having parallel expenditure planning processes. And so I'll be talking more about the regional expenditure planning process. Consuelo will kind of talk a little bit about the local planning process. I'm going to outline some of the rules that are in our statute that are imposed on that local planning process. One key difference is that BAFA's expenditure plan for BAFA's 20% of the retained funds is at this point nearing completion. This is one of the documents that Councilmember Flygore mentioned has been recommended for approval. It still needs to go to final approvals, but we are expecting to have the regional expenditure plan in place by the time this goes to voters. The county expenditure plans or the local expenditure plans, in distinction, those must not be finalized until after the election. Recognizing that, we can't force all the counties to go through this planning exercise without actually knowing whether or not there are funds. We're encouraging counties to get started early, and Consuelo's here to do that here in Santa Clara County. But there's no legal requirement for the counties to adopt those expenditure plans until after the election. So if we move forward, next slide, please. So this gives you a sense of how much money would flow to each county and the relevant direct allocation cities, depending on whether the bond is 10 billion or $20 billion. So you see it here in Santa Clara County collectively between the city of San Jose that gets its own allocation and the county, you're looking at between 2.2 and $4.5 billion. So that is in the smallest case scenario, still more than double the housing bond that was successfully passed previously in the county. So we're talking about a significantly larger amount of resources, not just re-upping what you have so diligently spent, but actually increasing that to try to really change outcomes. You'll also note that the amount of money coming back to Santa Clara County and San Jose is relatively larger than nearly every other county or area of the Bay Area. That has to do with the fact that this is the larger tax base. And so the amount that's going back to the county is in direct proportion to the amount of tax contributed by those communities. So I'm pleased that I get to be here showing y'all this slide because you get to see the much larger numbers. But again, that is baked by the statute that it has to be split up this way. So if we go to the next slide, please. And actually, if we could go back one quick slide, just to drill a point home on this. I mentioned, this is kind of unprecedented. Nothing of this scale has been done, even though there have been very successful bonds in Santa Clara County, Alameda County, San Francisco. We have never seen resources on this scale going to every single county all at once. And so I want to underscore the game-changing potential of this. I think there has been a lot of success actually rolling out the local bonds. And yet we are still seeing significant unhoused residents in our communities. We are still seeing displacement. We are still seeing overcrowding. We have not yet been able to solve the problem as diligently and effectively as we have been able to manage those smaller pots of funds. This is trying to take, this isn't, and not to say that, nearly $1 billion is breadcrumbs, but this is like a whole different meal, if you will. Every single county getting resources at this scale is just something we've never seen before. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you for indulging me there. So additional rules that are imposed by the statute include different spending categories that apply both to the 80% of funds that are retained locally, as well as the 20% of funds that BAFA has itself. So this rather complicated diagram here, let me walk you through it very quickly because this is actually quite important for the expenditure planning process that y'all will be walking through at the county level and at the city in San Jose. So on the left-hand side, you see the 80% of funds that are retained by counties and cities. There's a 52, so there's an 80-20 split, and then there's a 52-15-5 split. And the 52-15-5 relate to production, preservation, and protection. And those are minimum allocations that must be spent on each of those three Ps. And then what you see in that purple part of the chart is what's known as flexible funding that could be spent on any of those three Ps if eligible, as well as various other housing related uses. And I'll get into that in just a minute. On the BAFA side, so on the right-hand side of this, you see the same 52-15-5 split. The one major difference is that BAFA has an optional up to 10% local government grant program. And so that will be money that is administered regionally, but that will be granted out to local governments for a variety of housing related uses. And then the 18% flexible funds on the BAFA side must be spent on one of those three Ps. A key note you see at the bottom here is that currently, so this is a general obligation bond. And under state constitutional law, general obligation bonds must be spent on the acquisition or improvement of real property, what's colloquially known as bricks and sticks. So what that means is you cannot spend bond funds on services. And what that means practically, and so that's just a legal restraint that we are all operating under. It's a restraint that currently applies to the county's bond. So practically what that means is that the protections activities are not actually eligible under this bond currently. So if that remains the case, then those protection dollars would be able to be reallocated to one of the other eligible uses. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm gonna just do a couple quick slides on the parameters of the local expenditure planning, and then I'll talk about the regional expenditure planning where we've got some more details. So let's go to the next slide, please. So for the 80% of funds, each county and city that receives direct funds must adopt an expenditure plan that is approved locally by their governing body. So for the county level, it'll be the Board of Supervisors, and for the direct allocation cities, their city councils. Those expenditure plans, as we just talked about, must have the 52% minimum allocation for production of new housing, 15% for preservation of existing housing, and 5% for tenant protections if eligible. Additionally, the production funds, the minimum 52%, must prioritize projects that meet the extremely low income, very low income, and low income RHNA targets. And so that is figuring out exactly how to do that is an exercise that must be done within each county, depending on the overall county RHNA allocations. The 28% funds of flexible funds can be used for housing and housing related uses. And this is one where I like to pause because this is another innovation. I think that's was very wisely included in our statute. This allows for housing related uses, which means infrastructure and other public costs that are incurred from the production of new housing. So that includes, for example, underground infrastructure, water, sewer. It includes, for example, parks. It includes, for example, potentially schools to accommodate new school-age children. As I'm sure many of you know very deeply, there is oftentimes concerns in community that if we're adding more housing, how are we going to have public services that can accommodate the new residents? Baked into this bond is money for housing and money that can go towards those additional services. They must still meet the bond test, so you can't kind of pay the folks who are, walking around the park picking up trash, but you can pay for new parks, park improvements, school improvements, et cetera. And so they must be tied to the production of new housing. It can't just be kind of, we want to fund this new freeway overpass just because we've always wanted to and we haven't had money. There has to be a nexus. But as we all know, there is very oftentimes a nexus between housing and the demand for new services. So that's something that's really exciting. It's different than the other housing bonds that we have seen. And it's up to each jurisdiction that has that direct allocation to determine how they would like to allocate those funds. Those funds can also be spent on housing, by the by. It must not be spent on schools, parks, et cetera. But BAFA is not going to be in the business of telling the counties and the cities how they should allocate those funds, other than to make sure they statutorily comply with this. And finally, on that point, if the expenditure plans satisfy all the criteria in the statute, they are deemed approved as a matter of law. So it's not a discretionary approval on the part of BAFA. So we can move to the next slide. A couple other key general rules. So this is an affordable housing bond. All of the money must be spent on affordable housing as defined here. So the housing must be deed restricted. And there is a cap up to 120% of AMI. So for example, this bond cannot be used to fund market rate housing, luxury housing, et cetera. It may be used in part to cover other units as long as they are deed restricted affordable as part of a broader mixed use development. But these funds, public funds, can only go towards affordable housing as defined here. For the counting dollars, rental properties, ownership, interim housing are eligible uses under those various funds. So there's a great amount of flexibility for different counties and localities to identify their greatest needs. And all spending done with those local funds must conform to the local expenditure plan. And so once that plan is developed and adopted, that will then guide the expenditures. And that there's a kind of an accountability mechanism that's baked in there, so that there can't be kind of discretionary decisions to spend money in a way that is out of whack with the priorities set by the elected bodies. So we can go to the next slide. This is just a sample kind of local outreach timeline. And so Consuelo will talk more about kind of what may be on the deck here in Santa Clara County. There is, I should say here, there's no specific set of requirements that BAFA is imposing on the counties in terms of the outreach and the planning process, but for one, and the one that is now in our statute, is that counties must consult with their cities in the development of the expenditure. And so the county board ultimately gets to adopt that expenditure plan, but the cities must be a part of the planning process. Which is why this group is such an excellent group to hear this presentation and move this work forward. Kind of the key thing here, we could see a lot of different things happening in different counties. In some counties, we're seeing them starting with outreach to the public. In some counties, we're seeing very specific kind of city by city outreach. We're seeing a lot of variation across the 9 counties, as you could imagine. The idea, though, again, is that we're encouraging the counties to start talking to their cities prior to the election, even though those expenditure plans are not due until after the election. So that's the main takeaway here. We can go to the next slide, and I think this will bring us to the regional expenditure planning process. So we can go to the next one. BOFA as an agency and the statute that created us was in part modeled on the New York Housing Development Corporation. And the idea is not to make everywhere in California look like Manhattan. The idea is to take this finance agency in New York, which is one of the highest rated public finance agencies in the United States, and try to replicate that here, mapping it and adapting it as necessary for our local context. The signature quality of the New York Housing Development Corporation that BOFA is intending to replicate is that it is self-sufficient. This is a finance agency that does not take taxpayer dollars and yet still finances tens of thousands of affordable housing units every single year. So you see the stats here on the left that they're issuing bonds between $1.5 and $2.7 billion annually without taxpayer support. They are committing as subsidy to those deals, not just debt, but actual subsidy between $100 million and $300 million every single year. They're financing, dozens of projects every year and producing between 9,000 and 15,000 units every year. This agency has financed over 200,000 units in the city of New York. It's been around for 50 years. So they have had quite a long time to get themselves here. But a key difference that gives the Bay Area actually an advantage over them is that they did not have the ability to pass a general obligation bond to capitalize initially. So they had to work over decades to build up their balance sheet such that they could engage in this kind of financing activities. BOFA, on the other hand, would come in with between $2 to $4 billion from the bond. That would be an initial capitalization that would allow us to accelerate towards this sort of goal. And so the idea for BOFA in the long term is use this bond to actually set up a self-sustaining regional finance agency that will not have to go back to the voters every number of years to reauthorize taxes on themselves to finance affordable housing. The idea is this is a systems change idea. It's not just like, let's raise money, build housing, go ask for more money. This is about changing the way that we finance affordable housing in the Bay Area for generations to come, and to relieve the taxpayers of the burden that they're currently carrying to do that. But we have to ask them to pony up first. And so that is a part of the, if this does indeed move forward, that will be a role for the campaign to play. So if we can go to the next slide, please. This is a slide that shows the kind of thing that BOFA could do if successful in the future with a bond. And this is a financing model that New York has used to great success, where they're able to build up their balance sheet. And so in this instance, as an example, we can show how BOFA could use $15 million, for example, as cash collateral that could then actually go to the capital markets, borrow against that $15 million in the right economic circumstances to raise $100 million. Then we could issue out those $100 million to finance new affordable housing with loans on all of those projects that then, in fact, are repaid over time. And if very carefully crafted, and we've employed as part of our business plan consultants, the architects of the New York financial model, and so they've been working us on the financial modeling for this, you can actually make enough off of those interest payments to have essentially net revenue. You can pay back the bond investors, have net revenue that then, as a public entity, we reinvest back into new programs. there's right now, affordable housing in the state of California, and particularly here in the Bay Area, nearly every project, even ones that all of your cities are putting money in, a private bank is in there. A private bank has made a loan on that. They've got debt in there, and the private banks are profiting off of your subsidy dollars. Everywhere that is happening. It's not just you. Just to say, like, that is the way the system is constructed right now. It does not have to be that way. And again, we have a successful model that shows a different approach where we can have a public financing mechanism that captures that revenue. And then instead of giving it to Wall Street investors and paying out dividends, we are reinvesting that back into our communities. So this is a very sophisticated model. It's going to take time to get there. It took New York, about 30 years to get there. Based on our projections, BOFA, we think it could be more like 10 to 20, depending on the size of the bond. But this is a generational opportunity to change the system. So we can go to the next slide. We can get wonky finance with anybody afterwards who would like to do so. So this is trying to graphically represent the growth trajectory. So starting off with the bonds as an initial capitalization, growing over time to a diversified set of revenue streams, initially starting out by increasing our capacity, having technical expertise, regional leadership, and then growing over time to become a public mortgage lender. Many of our board members are very excited about the notion of functionally operating somewhat like a specialized public bank. And then additionally, the programs that we have initially are going to be limited by those constitutional rules about bond funds. But when revenue is generated over time, those revenues are not so limited. So that would allow BOFA to have more flexible funding that, for example, could be used for services, could be used for operating subsidy for permanent supportive housing, could be used for rental assistance, could be used for a lot of things that currently are not eligible for bond funds in the future. So this is, I mentioned earlier, we can't fund those 5% tenant protections right now under the current bond rules. One of the ways that we can get there is through this public financing model that will allow us to have more unrestricted funding in the long term. So let's go to the next slide. So that work in terms of developing a business plan. And so the business plan has now been recommended for adoption by the boards. We've spent the last several years working with our committee members, including present company, to refine that model. And so that is one of the key documents that's going to be up for final approval in the coming months. An additional document, a key document, is BOFA's actual regional expenditure plan. This is required by the statute, and the statute lays out certain specific requirements that must be included in this. So we've got some rigidity around what must be in this, and then there's some discretionary decisions that our boards have been working through over the last couple of years. So in terms of rigidity, what is required? You see up here, we have to talk about the estimated share of funding that will be spent on each program category, the estimated number of households served, estimated number of homes, specific programs and projects. Just yesterday, one of the main approval item related to labor standards that would apply to BOFA's 20%. And so those will be included in the expenditure plan. And a key thing to flag here is this expenditure plan is for BOFA's 20%. For the county's dollars, there will be a county expenditure plan. For San Jose's dollars, there will be a San Jose expenditure plan. So the discretionary decisions included in BOFA's expenditure plan do not apply to the local funds. So let's go to the next slide. And this shows the discretionary guidance that we've received from our boards. So for each of those 4 program categories, the 3 Ps plus our local government grants, there are a number of initial priorities identified by our governing bodies. So the first is to prioritize permanent supportive housing and extremely low income housing whenever we possibly can. Additionally, through a lot of advocacy actually of some of our members from here in Santa Clara County, there's a return to source target for each county of BOFA's dollars. And so the idea is actually that BOFA will be reinvesting our production funds in each county in proportion to their contribution to the bond. And so part of this is to address any concerns that the region is going to be siphoning off dollars from Santa Clara County to build housing in Solano County. This priority was implemented to ensure that that's not going to run amok. Additionally, our boards have been very clear that we should be working collaboratively with our local jurisdictional partners and not competitively. That is going to require a lot of coordination between the various different housing departments, especially given the bottlenecks that we have been experiencing at the state tax credit and bond allocation committees to make sure that BAFA-funded projects aren't getting state dollars that the county projects want. So we need to have a way of managing our pipeline collectively in order to avoid that kind of competition. We also know that we need to adopt a flexible approach, be opportunistic, and to pursue cost efficiencies whenever we can, knowing that the cost of construction have been going up everywhere and that impacts the overall number of homes that we're able to build for everybody who needs them. On the preservation side, I'm going to try to go quickly. I know I'm droning on, I apologize. We're going to be prioritizing investments in historically disinvested areas. The highest priority will be given to properties that are at immediate risk of eviction or losing their affordability restrictions. Like if there's an existing affordable home that has a deed restriction that will expire and all of those tenants may get their rent increased. And then finally, there's a targeted set aside of 20% for specifically community controlled housing approaches. So that includes community land trusts, limited equity housing cooperatives, et cetera. For tenant protections, if constitutional, we'll be assisting those tenants with the greatest need, but currently that is not constitutional. And in terms of local government grants, the goal is to prioritize grants that will benefit the overall community and address the need for more housing, as well as targeting one investment minimum per county. So again, the idea that we want to, the region needs to not play favorites between the counties and rather make sure that these investments are appropriately balanced across counties. Next slide. All right, so that was a lot of information about what we've been doing regionally. Here, let me show you a couple slides just about how we're going to and when we will be making these final decisions. So let's go to the next slide. This demonstrates, or tries to demonstrate at least, schematically the different types of decisions that need to be made and when they will be made. So at the very top, you see the state law framework. There's the California Constitution that sets currently the voter limit that we need, like what vote threshold we need to pass a bond at 2/3. It also limits our use of GO bonds. And then there's also our piece of legislation. So state law governs here. That middle box is the current set of decisions that our two governing bodies are making. So this relates to the initiating resolution. So that's the action that ABAG will take next, one of the actions ABAG will take next week to move this bond forward. The election resolution, which is the corresponding resolution made by BAFA. So ABAG must act first, according to the statute, and then BAFA is allowed to proceed. So those are the two steps in our two-step process. Then there's the regional expenditure plan, which I just outlined, as well as the BAFA business plan, which is designed to get us towards that New York model. You see in the green box at the bottom, we're not making every single decision before the election. You know, there will be, in the future, if this bond does indeed pass, there will be more detailed program guidelines, notices of funding availability. There will be a lot more minutia that needs to get worked out by the boards in the future. So there may be some, and we have this in because sometimes we get a lot of questions around like, will I get 3 points if my project is located here? And it's like, well, we're not there yet. Let's make sure we actually have dollars to spend before we get into that level of detail. So next slide, please. This is the decision-making pathway for these various documents. So in January, our advisory committee, and Consuelo is one of our members of the advisory committee, unanimously recommended to move all of this forward. Then it went to the policy committees on both the ABAG and the BAFA side in February, which recommended moving everything forward with a caveat that we were directed to engage in negotiations and discussions with stakeholders around labor standards that would apply to the bond dollars. And so there were actually a couple meetings in March, and then an additional meeting just yesterday where we discussed all of those. And then next week, the ABAG Executive Board takes its final action. So that is really like, once ABAG votes on that initiating resolution, BAFA cannot change the content. We will not have time. So a BAFA must act within the parameters that are established by ABAG. And so according to the statute, BAFA must have first a informational meeting on all of these items before it can take action. And so when ABAG votes in April, the next step is for BAFA to have an informational item in May and then final action in June. And I'll say we are planning one last poll that we expect to be out in kind of the April-May timeline so that our boards have one last poll to inform that final decision in June so that the research is as up to date as possible. So next slide, please. Okay, quick couple slides, accountability and oversight. This is coming up a lot in our discussions and some of the prior polling that we've done, that this is extremely important to the public. So if we go to the next slide, fear not, there are strong accountability measures that are baked into our statute as well as into the ballot measure as it's currently crafted. So at the local level, counties and cities must create these expenditure plans. Those must be adopted at public meetings by their publicly elected bodies. The plans must be approved by BAFA if all requirements are met. So there's a quick check just on, are we actually meeting all of the legal requirements? And you see here that the plans must do these things, be approved at a local meeting, comply with all relevant laws and regulations, and must include consultation with the cities. And then additionally, after the bond is passed, once spending happens, there must be annual reports from each county and direct allocation city about how they're spending the money and the outcomes that are achieved. So if we go to the next slide, similar requirements apply to BAFA, both for BAFA's 20% of funds, as well as BAFA as a regional entity overseeing the totality of funds. So BAFA will be collecting all of those reports from each county and city and compiling those for an overall report of what this bond has been able to do. This will also include financial audits we have to make regular annual reports actually to the state legislature. And then there will be regular independent audits, very similar to what has been set up at Measure A1 here in the county. And then additionally, there will be a citizen oversight committee. So let's go to the next slide. And I think, all right, last couple. If we go to the next one, this is critically important. I imagine that all of you, or if you haven't, ACA1 is a big deal in the state for local governments generally and specifically for this bond. So the main thrust of what ACA1, and ACA1 right now has qualified for the ballot. It is going to the voters in November currently, unless the legislature does something different. And what it would do is lower the voter threshold for various types of revenue measures from 2/3 down to 55%. So similar to school bonds, essentially. And written into ACA1 is that it could apply to any local measures that are concurrently on the ballot. So the idea is that if ACA1 passes, if ACA1 does not pass, the regional housing bond must have 2/3 approval. If ACA1 does pass, then the regional housing bond must only have 55% approval. So ACA1 is a kind of critical piece of the puzzle in terms of moving this forward. I'll just note that there are ongoing conversations in the Capitol about tweaking ACA1. And so those are not resolved right now. And so we have the current language of ACA1, but we may not have the final language of ACA1. And so we are monitoring that extremely closely. Next slide. This is the last one. How do you get engaged? There's various ways to stay engaged with our bodies regionally. We've got, publicly noticed meetings that you're all very familiar with. I'm sure you can sign up for the mailing list. You can email us. You can talk to your representatives here in Santa Clara County who are very engaged on this. And then locally, Consuelo will be talking about all the various ways that you can be plugged into the local expenditure planning process, knowing again that one of the very few requirements that does apply to the local planning process is that cities must be included in the way that the county goes about its planning. So that is it. Thank you very much for bearing with me.
Thank you, Daniel. Consuelo?
And maybe one point of clarification, and good evening, everybody. Consuelo Hernandez, Director, Office of Supportive Housing. Is that the board doesn't actually have to approve the placement of the ballot
Yes.
measure. It is BAFA has the authority to do that. Our registrar of voters and our county council has to take an action item to the board, but it is not to approve or deny the placement of the bond. So just wanted to make that.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah. The ability to place the measure on the ballot is legally given to BAFA. The counties have non-discretionary requirements to consolidate the election so that there can be like a measure A, in every single county. And so an example of this was the Bay restoration measure that was passed previously. So similar administrative actions, but purely administrative actions, as you're saying.
Thank you. I just wanted to point that out because I've been asked that a few times. I know that there are a few new folks, and so I wanted to start with the background of Measure A and how we decided to make, the process that we use to engage cities when we started to create our strategies around Measure A, our expenditure planning, the work that we did. Our hope is that we've built enough momentum with Measure A. We have a pipeline of about 100 properties that are not funded yet, that we have the ability to capitalize on that momentum. So I'll walk you through our current outcomes for Measure A, what we did to get to our common goals. And the other thing I'd like to point out is, as Daniel mentioned, we haven't actually done any engagement with cities or our board. We've issued one off-agenda report that basically summarizes what Daniel just spoke about. Very similar with the city of San Jose. They've issued, their staff has issued one memo around the background. But it's this, chicken and egg. Do we go out and start doing some engagement without confirmation that the ballot is actually moving forward? Particularly given how limited our staff time is, both at the county level and at the individual smaller city levels, is, we've been providing little information here and there, but in June, if things go as planned, then I think we will actually start developing that community engagement strategy. Next slide. One more. So as a reminder, if you're not familiar with Measure A, it's 950 million ballot measure, general obligation. It was passed by the voters in 2016. And there were three kind of general buckets of allowable expenses with specifically targets around AMI levels. The bulk of that was to fund multifamily rental housing, specifically permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, extremely low income, and 700 million was allocated towards the production of new housing. The other 100 million was also for multifamily rental, but it focused on very low income. Programmatically, we basically see those as the same. We didn't issue two different solicitations, it was combined. And I'll kind of last minute add, when the conversations were happening at the board, was this desire to provide people who previously weren't allowed, because of resources lacking in our community, to purchase their first home. And so we set aside up to 150 million for households earning up to 120% of the area median income, or the quote unquote missing middle. And that was intended to fund multifamily rental in that income category and first-time home buyer programs. Next slide. So what did we do when Measure A happened? There was a lot going on in 2014 and 2015. The board, in partnership with maybe 15 other groups, including representatives from cities, created a housing task force. And one of the outcomes in 2015 of that housing task force is we need money. And we know that locally we're struggling. And so there was a decision to explore the placement of a for our region, Santa Clara County, housing bond. That happened around October 2015. Then there were discussions that happened. The decision was made to place the ballot July, August, and then we went to the voters in November and it passed. So Daniel had a really long runway to put together the business plan. I started with the county September 2015. And a year later, the bond passed, and a month after the bond passed, we basically had to create a program and engage the cities. The good thing was we already had a lot of policy alignment. The county in 2014 made a commitment basically saying housing is critical. It is a service that we should be providing, and we want to play a different role. Because we don't govern land use in any of your cities, we really can't say, yes, build this housing here. We need your partnership. But the board, by doing that and taking that action, started to set aside a couple $1 million here and there. And between this 2014 decision by the board and when the bond passed, we funded about $25 million worth of housing. Edwina Benner here in Sunnyvale. There's a few other projects. I think there's one in Morgan Hill that we were able to fund with that one-time fund, basically to prove that the county was a player in the development of housing. We also had a great established partnership with the Housing Authority, with the city of San Jose. We issued our kind of local supernova the summer before the bond pass. And we said, let's fund these projects together and you provide this, let's leverage resources. And that was really the foundation for our ability to have a successful implementation bond. We set aside housing strategies, and one of the things that we really highlighted for our city partners is you have a RENA obligation. Now, we don't all agree with the methodology of RENA, but you're required to do it. You have a housing element. How can we work together to help you get there? Next slide. These are the RENA numbers that we were looking at when the housing bond passed. And this is the 5th cycle housing element. It's just a sense to give you what was the need in our community at the time? What was planned? What was the unmet need? And how much money did we actually need at the time in order to meet those goals? Those were the facts that we were looking at to come up with our measures and our goals. Next slide. And once the bond passed, like I said, it was a race to get something on paper. So we met with every single city. We scheduled a meeting, we did a little roadshow. We asked, what are some joint targets that we want to achieve? In some instances, very early on, cities said, we don't have the bandwidth or the capacity from a staff perspective, but this is what we can offer. It wasn't always financial. It was, we will help you streamline land use. Or in some instances, very creatively, like in Los Altos, we negotiated the memorandum of understanding for a specific property in Los Altos to help them actually approve their first 100% affordable housing project. We coordinated, we meet monthly with the city staff that do housing to share ideas. We implemented a shared pipeline, super simple and basic, one Excel sheet, what's the property, what's the funding need, how do we fund it? And we created this environment of, we don't need another regulatory process, another NOFA. If there's a project and it's eligible and it qualifies and we love it, let's fund it. So that was kind of the environment, and also recognizing that while a lot of our community members understand that affordable housing is needed, the measure passed by a very slim margin. So there was still a large portion of our community that does not want affordable housing in their neighborhood. So we worked with Destination Home and launched this Housing Ready Communities campaign, basically to educate the public. What does it mean to have housing in your community? We leveraged everything we could. I think at the time we were a staff of 4. We had 1.5 attorneys designated to this effort. So we also asked the board for more staffing, but we did not use any of the bond proceeds to cover staffing. So when you look at our outcomes and you look at the production numbers, we spent a little bit of money to cover the independent auditor that we've hired, but other than that, everything has been invested back in the community. Next slide. So we put our goals down on paper. We gave and assigned each city a housing bond unit goal. Basically, it's a percentage of your ELI and your VLI RENA numbers for the 5th cycle housing element. So what we track is we wanted to fund 1 project in every city, 1 project in every supervisorial district, and then again, trying to hit these marks. So you'll see, for instance, in the city of Campbell, we don't have approved units, but we do have 1 pipeline project in partnership with the VTA. And depending on those number of units, we'll be able to reach a portion of that goal. But the city of Campbell also has 4 other housing projects in the pipeline that don't have the resources to move forward. Regional bond could step in and help that. So part of what we're trying to do is, we did a really good job partnering with all of the cities. How do we leverage that? How do we continue that? How do we work with the city of San Jose, who's going to receive their own allocation, and streamline some of our efforts? So right now, when we fund a project in Sunnyvale and San Jose, you have money in the project, I have money in the project, 60 attorneys, it's really expensive. So can we say, let's decide together, it should only have 1 funding. It doesn't mean we're not partnering, it just means we're being very effective and efficient in how we spend our resources. Next slide. And what have we done in the last 8 years? I think that we're on year 8. We have approved $683 million towards 56 housing developments across 10 cities in the county, representing 5,816 units. It sounds like a lot and it doesn't sound like a lot. It's very expensive to build. When we started the bond, the cost per unit was about $535,000. Here in the North County, it's about $1.02 million per housing unit. Cost of land, 46% increase in cost of construction over the last 4 years. Of course, none of us predicted global pandemic. And that factored into some of the delays with our projects. We set aside $20 million towards this Empower Homebuyer program. We've helped 64 households purchase their first home. One of the findings from this program is we can absolutely not compete with people who come in with cash. Even when we have the money available, we've increased the amount that we loan. It doesn't matter. We always come, they do not pick us, even though we have the money and have a very streamlined way of releasing the resources. The other really great thing that we were able to accomplish, as I mentioned, we negotiated 5 memorandums of understanding, again, recognizing that some of the smaller jurisdictions don't have dedicated housing staff, and that there's a different way of partnering, fee waivers, offering up of land. In the city of Mountain View, it was, I think, one of our first MOUs, and we made a commitment to leverage $80 million in Mountain View. We actually just are increasing that. On Tuesday, the board is voting to allocate an additional $5 million for Lot 12, but it's because we have that relationship. And we, want to make sure that that project is funded. But in that case, we didn't ask for another application. It was a project in our pipeline, stuck. There's an application due on April 26th. Just do it, and very, very grateful that we have the board that we have who is very supportive of our work and is always championing these efforts. Since 2015, the county, in partnership with all of you, has developed 6,619 housing units, of which 3,015 are set aside for homeless individuals or families. When all developments are in operation, this will actually serve approximately 17,400 people. Next slide. This just gives you a bit, we track everything. We have this amazing oversight committee that gives us a lot of input about, we're not really good about talking about the work. We really are heads down, get to work, but it's really important for the public to see how we have deployed the resources effectively, efficiently. We're on track to meet the goal. We will actually build more housing units than we thought back in 2016. This shows you what we have remaining, but every single one of those dollars is already tied up to a project, but we don't bring the project forward to the board until it's actually has their entitlements and it's ready to be presented. For instance, Vice Mayor Kamei, we have a project in your district. It's not included in here, but the money is set aside for it.
Oh, thank you.
Next slide. This shows you, again, our oversight committee gave us this really great idea of showing the numbers in a different way. So of the 56 projects, 23 are in operation. I can't tell you, people still don't think that we have done anything. This is our attempt to show you that, in fact, we have not just allocated, but things are happening. Of the 56 projects, 17 are kind of stuck and waiting for tax credits, but of those 17, 6 were approved in December. So usually it takes, 5 years to get this done. And for us, this is showing tremendous progress. Next slide. So what does it mean to engage with you all locally for the regional bond? Next slide. As Daniel mentioned, this is what it could potentially represent for our community. Santa Clara County has its one allocation. The city of San Jose has theirs. Next slide. And Daniel talked about the percentages. So if you look at that production number, if there is a 20 billion GO bond, we would get more money than the $950 million bond that we're currently managing. So if you remember, over 5,000 units, this would yield, just that line item would yield another 5,000 units. And I think there's some efficiencies that we can explore. When we started to implement the housing bond, it wasn't about the cost. It was build housing, move fast. And one of the strategies we might want to look at now is how do you build it with cost efficiencies in mind? We have a project in North County in the city of Palo Alto, 231 Grant Avenue is our first educator workforce housing. That project delayed for 1 year because we were trying to make it be everything. We wanted to use modular. We wanted to house teachers. We wanted it to be cost effective. We wanted to, you name it, and we were trying to do it. In the end, we shifted, didn't go to modular way, but we spent a year kind of, mucking around. So let's not do that. And let's make sure that when we look at goals, is it speed? Is it cost? Is it number, volume? What are those shared goals that we want to work on together? Next slide. This is the same information that Daniel shared with you on the business plan. I've laid it out in a slightly different way, only because I've been asked a few times whether we can fund affordable housing for educators. And what is this kind of 120% of the median area income? This is exactly like our current bond. Our current bond allows up to 120%. We were able to fund 231 Grant Avenue because the bond allows that. So if you think about our local housing bond, it's in that top category. Everything that you see Measure A fits in that. 15% of the funds for deed restricted affordable housing preservation. This is the area where I really feel we're going to need a lot of your support and help to develop goals. We don't currently have, as a county, a preservation strategy. The city of San Jose has something, Mountain View has something. I think there are some discussions in the North County, but we don't actually have goals. We know the units that are at risk, but beyond that, they're really, I feel like this is a really good opportunity for us to think about what are our shared goals around protecting people who are being priced out because their buildings are being sold, or as Daniel mentioned, rent increases. And there's a lot of effort in this space and sounds like a really good opportunity. And then the flexible funding, one of the biggest challenges in our community is we don't have enough project-based vouchers to support all of the work. And so this flexible pool could potentially, as Daniel mentioned, if there is the legislative update, ACA 1 passes, and if it allows for us to use resources in that way, this could be an opportunity for us to continue the work that we're doing. Next slide. So what's next? We have to come up with the community engagement. How do we engage with the elected officials? How do we engage with city staff? And how do we leverage those existing relationships that we have to set specific objectives? We focused a lot on unit count and AMI targets with our housing bond, but maybe we need to look at target populations. There's a specific interest in transition age youth, families with children. So looking at not the physical structure, but what are some of those targets of people that we want to house that we didn't get an opportunity to think about the first time. There's been a lot of staff turnover. We have new elected officials. What does that interagency coordination look like now? Earlier today, I had this wonderful call with some of the West Valley cities where it's, they have different types of opportunities than North County, San Jose, and South County. And how can we work together to come up with some joint strategies, because you can't fund it all, right? And so that type of environment where we can leverage each other's knowledge and resources. And then part of the work and ask of you all is, how do you want to be engaged? How do you want to inform both the engagement process and the goals that we set for the bond, recognizing that our board hasn't given us any direction at this point. We are working on sending them an update. We can send that to your staff and then they can send it to you. But at this phase, we're waiting for the BOFA actions before actually doing a deep dive into next steps. Next slide. So some ideas just for discussion purposes, again, has not been presented to anybody except you. And some possible city actions once the decision is made at the BOFA level is endorsement of the regional bond. Holding study sessions to update council members and members of the public. Encourage your staff to meet with our staff. Every time we meet with them, we're, this little simple spreadsheet. What property is it? How many units? When could it potentially be ready? And identify some local housing priorities and properties. You know, your housing elements, there's an opportunity there. We have a real estate arm that works out of our facilities and fleet team. They've worked with some of your communities actually to help acquire properties. You know, from a community engagement, what are some benchmarks? Maybe one meeting in every supervisorial district that includes the cities that are represented, meetings with local groups, special interest groups, neighborhood groups, and then really focusing on what are those goal settings and expenditure plans? Can we look at RENA, target populations, unit production goals, policy alignment? What are our joint efforts? And really, I think, I hope you feel the same way, that the way that we deployed our housing bond was in partnership with each of you. And that we can show you the very same collaborative spirit for the next time. You know, some cities have asked, can I get my own allocation? We have seen other communities do that, not be as successful. The kind of benefit is we have the staff, you don't have to create that capacity, but tell us what your goals are and we'll implement them. Next slide. I think that's it. So my information, if you have any questions.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm gonna dive straight into questions and comments because I know this was a lot, but we really wanted to make sure that we brought this education to the representatives from the different cities. And so thank you both for doing that. I think we will have to do a follow-up at a future meeting to really dive into the community engagement piece. So what I want to do right now is open it up for questions to Danielle and Consuelo, because I'm sure you have a lot of questions. There's a lot of information. Margaret and I have heard this many times, so I'm just gonna shut up right now and look for hands and throw your questions, please. Sergio.
Thank you. I'll try to be efficient. One, what's an example of a project that would get funded from the 20% regional allocation that wouldn't from the 80%? You mentioned something about regional, but I just want to understand what that means. And then second, I think I will just be faster this way. How are the discussions going? And Margaret and Nisi probably know much more about this, but in terms of 10 versus 20 billion and how's that shaping up? And when will we know?
Maybe before you answer your question, I should also say that I've warned Daniel that I'm getting the 20% for us.
Yeah, I mean, to the first question about let me take the second question first. So in terms of the amount of dollars, so we actually just at the committee yesterday presented some recent polling that we have done. And one of the findings of the polling is that the value of the bond between 10 and $20 billion makes no statistical difference. Which is interesting, and that's actually been confirmed by some focus groups that we had our pollsters do that suggested that kind of when you're talking about that amount of money, for most people, for whatever reason, the differences aren't sticking. So we have some research that indicates that the difference is not that there's no statistical difference. We've heard from, I will say, we do not have direction yet from our board on this. So we have heard some of our board members say, hey, go big or go home. If it's no statistical difference, like why not try to get more money to take this problem on at the scale that it needs? But I think that that's going to be kind of a political decision for the boards to make as we have more research down the road. It will be finalized. So the way that we're currently have it set up is that the ABAG executive board next week will vote to authorize a bond of up to $20 billion. And then the BOFA board will make the final decision in June with the most recent polling data about the exact amount. So that's the current setup. In terms of what projects would be funded by the 20% that wouldn't be funded by the 80%, it's not necessarily the case that there would be projects that you couldn't fund. So I would say, this is a place where we have a lot of opportunity for coordination, is like, maybe we want to think about the pipeline and, as Consuelo said, think about, well, we fund these ones, you fund those ones. That may be an approach. An additional approach may be co-lending. Maybe the county wants to come in with a typical type of subsidy that it's provided, but instead of going to JP Morgan Chase to get the hard debt, BAFA would be able to provide that hard debt at a better rate than the private bank would. And then we'd actually both be investing in the same project, but with different types of products. So I would think of it more as the puzzle, as I see it, it's about how do we have a complementary financing approach. And that will likely be different in different counties, given kind of the different priorities that we're going to see, and also like different other resources that the counties bring to bear.
Thank you.
Does that help?
I must admit that I do not completely understand what you guys are doing. But I do have some questions.
Yeah.
These are going to be general obligation bonds backed by the full faith and credit of the state of California. Is that correct? They're gonna be municipal bonds that have no federal or state taxes that are waged against them. Secondary.
So for the first, they will be not backed by the state of California, by BAFA. So in terms of the way that it will work is there will be an ad valorem property tax. And then that property tax will apply across the 9-county Bay Area. And then those property taxes will be bonded against by BAFA, which has the authority to go to New York or wherever.
They go to the markets and they sell these bonds to investors. Investors put their money into this bond that you're proposing. Now, with low income and very low income housing, I would imagine that these are not rentals, that they're purchases, or am I incorrect in that?
It's
assumption?
rental.
The rentals?
It will be primarily rental, yeah, so there's different rules on the different pots of money, whether it can be used for rental or ownership, but it will be primarily rental housing.
The ownership of the properties is incumbent upon the builders or the cities or the municipalities to own the properties themselves. Who owns the properties?
Could be a variety of situations. So you could have kind of a private developer that owns the property. You could have a city that owns the property and leases it to the developer. You could have a land trust, for example, that owns the property and has a different structure that actually that owns the dirt, but then separately operates like the building on top of it. So there's no, it can accommodate all different types of ownership structures.
It's not the tenant that owns the property, it's some municipality or some entity, correct?
Unless it was a home ownership unit, I mean, there could be that.
That was the original question. However, when the properties are sold or converted to something else, what happens to the profit? If there is a profit in that property, does it go back to paying principal back on the loan, the general obligation bond? Or does the owner of the property receive the profit?
They all have to be deed restricted. So the sale of the property wouldn't change, the deed would run with the sale of the property.
Okay, so even though they're deed restricted, there is some possibility of a profit in the actual asset itself. Who gets the profit?
Yeah, I would suppose it would.
I'm not opposed to this bond,
Yeah, no,
but
no,
I'm just asking these questions.
yeah, no, I'm
Can
curious.
Because I'm
Yeah.
not understanding,
On the rental side,
not on the rental side, because
on the
the renters,
homeownership, okay.
the renters become permanent renters forever.
right,
but
on the
the owner-
homeownership side,
The
it
home ownership side,
it-
somebody's gonna benefit from that.
yes, it depends on how you structure your program. Our Empower Home Buyer structure, we actually have a sharing of the, so we lend the money out, and if the homeowner sells, we recover our loan plus the appreciated value of the
That
purchase.
was the answer.
And then that money comes back to the county and we issue it back as more homeownership loans.
Okay, so the bonds are structured in such a fashion that they pay back interest and principal over a 30-year period, is my understanding, approximately. So as you're getting your principal back on property sales, then what you're doing is they're not paying back the principal. You're using, or you're paying back a portion of the principal, but you're using that money to roll over again.
Correct.
Okay, so that's interesting. Now, the other thing that I was thinking is that you're probably gonna use prevailing wages for your developers, is that correct? I think that's you're forced to in some fashion.
Our current housing bond, that is exactly what we do.
Okay, that generally increases the prices of the properties that you be paying for by a certain percentage, maybe a third or something.
The cost of construction for sure.
Okay, so I think that in the state of California, just no
I
opinion.
hope, Stan, I'm used to your questions, go ahead, and I hope everybody is patient because this is so important, I want to give everybody an opportunity to ask these questions.
These are
No,
very
go ahead.
generic questions.
No.
I think that they will be answered properly, and they will be asked by somebody else as well. So I don't know where to stop. So if we're.
Okay, after this one, let's give someone else an
Let's,
opportunity.
let me do this. You've answered enough questions for me.
Okay.
Yeah, and they were the right answers. Thank you. We have somebody else.
Okay, who'd like to go next? Mark, go ahead.
Larry.
Oh, I can
That's
see you,
fine,
Larry.
go ahead,
No, I
Mark.
don't have a question. She wasn't
Oh.
in your direction. Yeah.
Sure, so I have lots of questions. First, as far as polling, so is that released yet? You know, have you, and where does it stand with on the 55 versus 65, 2/3%?
Would you like to speak to that? You're welcome to.
Yeah, we had results yesterday at our meeting, and unfortunately, they were not pretty strong results. We're barely hitting 50% right now. And there was no, as Daniel mentioned, no real difference between the 10 to 20 billion. I've seen it too elsewhere. There's just a lot of voter fatigue in terms of more taxes and fees and whatnot. So that's gonna be the challenge. So we're hoping ACA will pass because I don't think there's any way we're gonna get to 67%. 56 is what we're shooting for. They did a breakdown by county, and interestingly, Santa Clara County came in at like 46%. So the other counties in North County, San Francisco, those were higher in the 50s, but for whatever, San Mateo, Santa Clara counties were under 50s.
And I appreciate that, because that's, you know, and that's been my question, not knowing all the details from the beginning of why not go for measure A2 measure as opposed to trying to do this. When you talk about, I love the concept to the New York what's it called? Housing. That was funded by the state, if I remember, or they did some initial funding. You know, great idea from a regional standpoint. It's why we talk to our state reps and say, this is a wonderful idea. Put $2 billion in it from a state standpoint, and we'll help fund local housing. You know, it's like you look, so to me, great idea. You know, my biggest thing is the 80-20 and that 20% and where it's used. From the 80%, you know, happy that San Jose is getting their portion. From a city standpoint versus a county, I definitely worry about how that's spread amongst the county. And if you want the cities to take action in favor of this, don't wait until after the election to set those goals in place. If you're not putting those goals in place by August at the latest, our cities won't be behind it, because that's the biggest issue here is you look at the cities and you saw the breakdown. I know lots of projects that tried to do Measure A and said, we're not going to. Too many hoops to jump through in order to get Measure A funding. We know projects here that, you know, try to get other funding, got a portion of Measure A, took too long and said, we can't do it. We can't move forward. You know, in my opinion, just my opinion, if you're not doing at least a portion of whatever thing dedicated from a county standpoint, based upon populations of cities, dedicated as opposed to we'll meet your goal. We'll try to make sure that there's something in every city. You won't get support again. So I'll lay that out there now. Oversight is a big thing. Being our organization's rep to Measure A, I've been seeing a lot of the and just the short-term prep since Glenn got off council, but decisions made by the supervisors on spending that were made outside of the board's decision. So, you know, some of the redirection of, so, you know, some of the numbers afterwards.
It was one,
But
it was our homeownership program was not performing, and we took $5 million and put it into production.
understood, but but it wasn't oversight by the committee. It basically funds were redirected and then reviewed afterwards. That, well, the supervisors have already made that decision. If you're going, you know, if you're going to say, well, it's no longer 80-15-5, it's now 85-10-5 or something of that nature, that decision should at least be taken to the oversight committee before major decisions. I totally understand. It's, you know, from a regional standpoint as well as a county standpoint, does the oversight committee just rubber stamp and say, okay, you know, we read the audit at each bond year. We got the auditor's report, we read it, and we kind of approve that, yeah, they spent the money in the general goals that were laid out there, as opposed to if they're redirections along the path of the expenditure, changing from the initial goals, those decisions should at least be feedback through whatever oversight there is. So I'm just laying out there, oversight is a big portion of this. It's accountability. And in this Measure A decision, not a bad decision by the supervisors. No accountability. The decision had been made by the time it came to the oversight committee. And that, you know, we've changed the original goals of the program for a reasonable situation, but not allowing the oversight committee to at least give feedback on I'll say, critical decision that you change those targets. And that's one of the things I worry about on whatever you're trying to, you know, in order to do real community outreach and get cities backing, you have to be pretty firm on this is how it's going to be laid out. And you have the Measure A, you know, oversight committee and the Measure A programs themselves to get that kind of funding from. Sorry, I on my soapbox a little bit. I'm sorry about that.
No. I want to quickly respond, just quickly. So one of the things we need to be aware is, as the Santa Clara County cities, we make up 23% of the electorate. And so to Larry's point about not waiting until after the election to engage with the cities and the communities, the great thing is the enabling legislation requires the county to engage with the cities so that we can develop this plan about how it will work, oversight. And so this is Consuelo kicking it off. I think the advantage, even though the legislation doesn't require this engagement until after and if the measure passes in November, there's so many benefits to starting the engagement now. One is the education piece, right? Because by going around to cities, not only are you getting our feedback like you heard from Larry, but also the public is becoming aware of this measure and how it could benefit their communities. So this is great feedback from Larry on the things that we all know our residents will want to hear, because we need them to vote and support the measure if it goes forward. And then on the polling piece, just quickly, I made a note here. It was a March 2024 poll. It's early. There were three areas that, you know, were barely hitting the 55%. And as Margaret said, we were below the 55%, assuming ACA 1 passes. So there's a lot of work to be done, but there's time for us to do that. And that's why we're starting this process this early. The last thing I will say is I hope everybody will bear with us tonight. I anticipate we'll go over no more than half an hour, but we thought this was important.
I'll get off my soapbox.
No.
No.
Go ahead.
I'll let other people talk.
Yeah, go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, what happens if we don't need all the money? Meaning, you know, if the population continues to decline, or if the economic engine lifts people above the AMI, or we can't just find projects. There's a number of ways that you might not need all the money. How does that work?
I guess I would start by saying that it appears to be a far off future where that may be true, given the current deficit and the current prices that we're seeing and the kind of like market production that would need to happen to change that. I mean, certainly the factors that you mentioned are all in play. I appreciate that question. Like, again, it's hard for me to imagine actually not spending on the bond fund. So I feel like I will need to take that question back and get back to you about like what would happen in the eventuality that wasn't necessary. There is a provision in the statute that states that if a county isn't using all of its funds or isn't spending them in a timely manner, then there is a mechanism through which both the ABAG Executive Board as well as the BAFA Board can spend those, that can, but it's like, it's after 5 years, it's got a lot of process. It has to have like a super majority of both boards, where the boards could take those funds to make sure that they are indeed spent somewhere in the region where needed. But the idea, so that, I guess that would be my answer, and I will look into this and get back to you soon.
Okay, I'm interested.
And they'll be issued in tranches,
Yeah.
so we would only be, spending the tranche that we issue.
Yeah, we are, if it's a $20 billion bond, our modeling is between 5 and 7 tranches. And so part of what we're actually gonna be doing with all the localities is looking at the pipelines. I mean, Santa Clara County is such an excellent example, and why I actually think y'all are very likely to spend all of your bond funds earlier and faster than many other counties, because you've got this great head start from the work here. And so we've worked with our bond council, and they've advised that that's absolutely doable. So like, for example, if Santa Clara County wants to kind of go gangbusters and spend all your money in 7 years, that is doable. I think in that instance, if the county were to spend all of its money and then not have any kind of the regional bond funds that were left available, that would just kind of be the end of that county specific allocation.
Okay, thank you. So I was thinking along the same lines as Larry about the current polling and what it indicates. I went back and I took a look at Measure A, and it actually passed by just a very slim margin, by like 1%. So I'm just curious, what like going back to Measure A, is there any way to go back to Measure A and find out like where the process was at this point in the planning, to see, what the percentage was at this point, and get an idea? Because I remember I was just appointed to the council when Measure A was being talked about. And I remember going to some, community meetings, and Cindy Chavez was there and promoting it. And I mean, I totally supported it and all, but I'm just curious, where was Measure A at this point in the planning process before going to the polls? The other, I've got 2 other questions. So what do you see in terms of like who's gonna be building these projects? Are they gonna be like developers that focus on affordable housing? Or is it open to any developers? Because I think there's a little bit of like a cost. There could be a little bit of a cost differential between people that specialize in affordable housing versus, somebody that goes like with luxury housing, for instance. And then my last question, who's going to be managing the properties? Is it going to be somebody like John Stewart, a BOD? What do you foresee? Not maybe getting into the weeds, but I'm just curious, who's going to be managing them?
Absolutely. In terms of who will build it, we have a mix of mostly affordable housing developers, and then we have some market rate that have an affordable housing arm developers. We have a few of those. And the cost to build is really because it's subject to prevailing wage.
Yeah.
So even if it is a market rate developer, they're still subject to that. So that cost differential doesn't truly matter.
Okay.
In terms of who manages it, one of the capacity building opportunities or gaps that we've identified is we don't actually have a lot of property management companies. We have one property actually in the city of Morgan Hill. I believe the developer's on their 3rd property management company, and it's a family housing project. It's a mixed income site. And we're just struggling with property management. John Stewart is one of our biggest partners, but even they're at capacity.
Yeah.
So one of the things we've identified is if this happens, we will have to invest in building that arm of our work out.
Thank you.
2 more
maybe-
minutes. Go ahead, Marcia.
So if we do the 20 billion, and it breaks down, sounds like it's 2 billion and approximately 2 billion to the county. Could the county give San Jose another billion? Or will that be restricted to?
Rosemary perked up.
Or is it really restricted to the rest of the cities in the county? I think that goes to kind of where Larry was going with this as well.
We could fund San Jose projects.
Okay. I'm out. No. I think that's important to know.
want to build in Morgan Hill?
We do very well. in Morgan
I know
Hill.
you do, I know you
Yeah.
do.
Secondly, is there a point at which in a polling, that if you say, it's just not is there a number where you say it's not reaching that number, we're gonna hold off?
I think that I would turn that over to my board members. Yeah.
Certainly, there would be. The challenge is the timing as well.
Yeah.
So if we held off and didn't go in November of 24, we could do a special election in 25, but that's gonna be even harder
Yeah.
because that turns out a different electorate. So then we look at 26 and
There's a number of other.
There's a trend.
Yes,
Yeah.
there's
Something else
a
brewing.
transportation
Oh my
culture
gosh,
that's
yeah.
being discussed, but we'll talk about that later tonight too. So that's gonna be the
Okay,
challenge.
that's good for me. Thank you.
Yeah.
One just note on the polling is there's actually, so we've been at this a long time, as Consuelo said, and we were initially poised to actually go to the ballot in November of 2020. So when I first joined the agency, it was January of 2020. It was like, hey, BAFA exists as a matter of state law suddenly on January 1st, 2020. And the polling that we had at that time was right around 2/3, actually for the regional bond. And so we've been doing polling over the last 4 years now, consistently with the same pollster asking similar questions. And so we have this longitudinal data that the board saw. And what we're seeing is our pulse, I'll just say what our pollsters have characterized this as is it's characteristic of an overall voter climate. Not like, oh, it's a regional bond, so people don't like it. It's that voters don't like taxes right now. Voters don't trust government. And so at least that appears to have been like falling. And the voter dissatisfaction with taxes, voters' trust in the effectiveness of government to solve problems. Those are directly correlated in the polling data over the last 4 or 5 years. It's a challenge.
They do not trust us. Okay, I'm gonna close questions and comments. I will check if there's public comment. Shally, anybody online?
No one online for public comment.
Anyone in the room? Okay, and again, thank you both so much. I think, having Consuelo on our team moving forward, if this gets put on the ballot, is so important and persuasive because we have a real life example here in Santa Clara County where it worked and we were able to produce. And so I think just listening to you was a selling point about why we should support this. So thank you. Consuelo, I'm thinking we'll have you back to focus and delve more into that slide where you had the different ways we can engage, like the city council action, community engagement, because I think that's an opportunity for us to give you feedback on how you can engage with the cities, because this is required under the law. We're going to tell them how we want them to spend the money, set up the expenditure plan, have oversight committees and all these things. And of course, every city is going to say we want, something built in our city. But let's plan to have that follow up, and I'll defer to you on whether or not it makes sense to have that meeting with us before you go to the board or after you get your board direction. Okay, so thank you both.
Thank you.
Around this.
Okay. Okay, next let's move on to item number 4, which is SBRIA. We've pushed them out 2 meetings now, so we're very happy to have them. And as they go to the front, I can quickly read our guest speaker Eric Nichols' bio, and I'll just summarize. He is originally educated to be a banker. He graduated from California State University, Long Beach, with a degree in business administration, finance. A fateful summer fighting forest fires just before graduation radically changed his career path towards public service. He has worked for fire departments in Southern and Northern California. After 6 successful years as the fire chief for the city of Palo Alto and Stanford, he joined the city of Santa Barbara as their fire chief in 2019. He completed a productive two-year assignment and retired after a 33-year career as a professional fighter. Eric has focused his professional research on emergency services, community engagement, and public relations programs, using social media as a community link in disasters and creating predictive analytic technology solutions. He joins us here today to talk about SBRIA in his role today. Thank you. And of course, we all know Russ.
Awesome. So I'll kick things off with a brief introduction. First and foremost, I want to say thank you for two things. Thank you for having us here tonight. And then thank you also to the Cities Association for appointing me to the board of SVRIA, where it's been my pleasure for the past 2 years to serve as board chairperson. I want to acknowledge a couple of SVRIA board members that we have in the room here tonight, myself as board chairman, Mark Turner from the city of Morgan Hill, and then my alternate from the Cities Association, Matt Hudes from the town of Los Gatos. Eric is our executive director, and then we have the same council in common. I see Jenny Quinn online. She's also our council for SVRIA. So we are very proud. We're a small and mighty agency. In the aftermath of September 11th, there was a great realization that we needed interoperable communications for our first responders who come into emergencies on September 11th. It was a great realization. Those agencies were not able to talk to each other, and that really made for a bad situation. So we've built the SVRCS, the Silicon Valley Regional Communications System that works in the entirety of Santa Clara County, north, south, east, and west. All of our first responding agencies, when the need arises, whether it's routine or a critical emergency, can communicate with one another. I always like to say, if the need arises, a police officer in Gilroy can talk to a police officer in Palo Alto immediately. And that's because we have a great technology system and that we also have great dispatchers. We have great partners in Motorola, Aviat, and Santa Clara County Communications. Shali reminds me that we have 20 minutes total and we're going to hit that mark. That includes Q&A. So I think without further ado, Eric, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Do you want to tell your story about the next picture? Can we advance the slide one?
Sure.
We've got there it is right there.
Yep, this is a photo that I took a couple of years ago at the National 9/11 Museum in New York City. I bet I'm not the only person in the room who's been to the National 9/11 Museum. And the short story that I have is when my wife and I were at this point of the exhibit, the tour guide talked about the interoperability issues on September 11th. And then as we left this hall, I said to my wife, I said, this is it. This is what we're working on at SVRIA. And it's just this whole confluence of emotions for me of the 9/11 Museum and then building something here in Santa Clara County that's a critical piece of public safety infrastructure. So thank you everybody for your support. We're here to talk about money and system upgrades. And with that, I think, Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Russ. And thank you for for abbreviating the bio. I've been in this role for about 3 years now. Very familiar with the county, very familiar with radio systems. And, we were born, SVRA was born out of the tragedy of 9/11. We originally were a joint procurement, purchasing, and grant group, of which Jenny had a hand in the very earliest days of putting this together. And then after the city of San Jose was very successful in acquiring large federal homeland security grants. So after 9/11, the federal government was giving out billions of dollars of money nationally for these interoperable regional radio system efforts. So the locals could talk to the state locals could talk to the feds, everybody could talk to each other, and that's really important. What happened in our county was the Santana Row fire, where San Jose realized, gee, we might need a regional radio system. And these tens of millions of dollars that we have aggressively acquired. And so there was negotiations that went on over a couple of years where all of those grant resources were turned over to the newly formed Silicon Valley Regional Interoperability Authority. And we became a joint powers authority. Next slide, please. So there's two desired outcomes for today. Some of you have already seen this presentation. I promise you there's about 2 or 3 slides that are really important. I'm going to keep it at a very high level for you. But there's 2 outcomes for today. We are to the point that the radio system over the next 10 to 15 years is going to need a life cycle replacement. We're an information technology system. The data that we move is voice packets. We're the same technology as a cellular phone, but just very secure and to protect both our firefighters, police officers, paramedics, and things like cybersecurity. And then to support the working committee, which is our staff, fire chief, police chiefs, dispatch managers, 2 city manager appointees, with feedback and planning on our reserve funding approach. Next slide, please. So every single city, with the exception of Los Altos Hills, although you could say that Los Altos Hills technically is a member because you contract for your fire and law enforcement services from members. I'm actually having conversations with your city manager about, can we bring you on as a member, just so we can say when we go for grant dollars, every single city, the county, our largest special districts are part of SVRIA. The top 3, so County of Santa Clara, City of San Jose, and VTA make up really about 2/3 of both the revenue as well as the radios and the use on the system. And then the rest of the cities pick up that last 1/3. Next slide, please. This is what the authority owns. I mean, we are the small but mighty JPA, and I think the reason the JPA is so successful is we have a very successful funding formula. There is a very successful board governance process. We've actually been approached by other organizations within the county that there's a slight nexus to what they're proposing, and they want to join up because we have a successful, funding formula, a very collaborative board, and it really is a successful JPA. This is what the JPA owns. We own the infrastructure. So we own the towers, the antennas, the microwave dishes. We own all the IT infrastructure, and we own the FCC licenses, which are incredibly valuable because that wavelength space is so impacted. So this is what the authority owns. Next slide, please. This is what our individual members own. So you own the radios that your police, firefighters, EMTs, paramedics, public works folks, utilities folks use. You own those. And there's a little over 12,000 radios on the system of our members and participants, and we're processing about 65,000 transmissions a day, which is pretty extraordinary. Every time a police officer or firefighter keys up that radio, that counts as one transmission. So about 24 million a year. Next slide, please. I love this slide because really it takes a team. Staff between Janie, myself, we have one other contract staff. We're all contract staff. We don't even total 1.0 FTE. So we are lean by design because you all pay dues, and we want that funding to go to the system, to the radios, to the infrastructure. So we're a very lean staff, but we rely very heavily upon our board of directors, who are elected officials, our staff working committee, who are kind of our executive staff throughout the county, our member agencies, your dispatchers, your dispatch managers. They participate in project and team meetings. So we do get a tremendous amount of staff support, both through the project and our technical team, and then our contractors. More than half of our budget is locked up in long-term service contracts with Motorola, our microwave provider, Aviat, and then County Communications that does work on the system as well. But this is why we work. It's a team. Next slide, please. Annual budget, we're about 5.1 million. And again, I said about 2/3 of that goes to long-term service contracts. So the maintenance and operations, just to maintain and operate the system annually. And so right now we're chasing the storm damage from early February. I just coded an invoice for about $25,000 to replace a piece of equipment that broke during the storm. That's what really we're in this maintenance and operations phase right now. The board has set aside about $500,000, so about 10% of the budget is set aside in a reserve, either for an operating reserve if something happens. And again, think of it in towers. We have 31 towers sites across the county. Each one of those sites, if they were to fire, fall down, get destroyed, it's about $1 million. So we're a very expensive piece, but we are setting aside some reserve funds. But that's why we're here today, because we haven't been setting aside enough. Next slide, please. just to give you a framework of what these systems cost, the first generation of SVRA, and again, at least 40 to 50% of it was grant funded, was about $90 million. The rest of the funds came out of our general fund budgets. They had done polling back in the late 2010s, 2008, 2009. There wasn't support for any sort of bond funding, tax override, anything like that. So we funded it with grant funding and we funded it with our member contributions. Next slide, please. If we were to go out and rebuild the system today, not just an upgrade of the infrastructure that's already there, but if we put out an RFP for a brand new system, we're probably looking at $175, $180 million. So the cost of building these systems has pretty much doubled in the 15 years that since we put out the first RFP. These systems are incredibly expensive. The challenge is there's very few providers out there that can build a system this sophisticated. There's basically two providers nationally, Motorola and L3 Harris. That's it. So it's almost like a monopoly that we're up against. It's not like we can go out and find a lower cost. And fun fact, somebody else's radios don't work on a Motorola system. So you have to buy these radios from Motorola. So that's been a challenge in managing that relationship. Next slide, please. So what we do know, our system technology that we're currently using now is about 20 years old. It's predicted to be lifespan of 25 to 30. We bought that technology kind of mid-cycle when we originally bought it, and the system was stood up in time for Super Bowl 50 with just a couple of sites. Then we built the rest out. So in some respects, we're a pretty new system, but the technology that we bought at the time was about 10 to 12 years old. So we are going to have to go through a life cycle replacement, and we have to replace this for a variety of reasons. One is cybersecurity. One, obviously the technology, we want our public safety technology to be the best because the folks that are using it out in the field need it to work all the time. And it does. We don't get busy signals. There's always been space, even during the storm that we had. Sadly, the busiest day the system ever had was the morning of the VTA shooting. So we had all of that incidents from the shooting, as well as 2 multiple alarm structure fires in San Jose, and then all of the routine radio traffic that's going on a normal, what would normally be a normal Wednesday morning. That was the busiest the system has ever experienced. As terrible as the sounds, the events that took place that day, the system had capacity to basically do 6 times that. So the system is built very robustly. We built a 10-lane freeway, and routinely we fill up 2 of those lanes, maybe for periods of the day, maybe 3 of those lanes, and then we go back to 2. So we have capacity, and we've been trying to bring on additional users onto the system. We're just in the final stages of bringing on the San Jose International Airport, the operations side, but that brings in another 200 radios to the system that helps offset some of these costs. So we know we're going to have to replace some of these things. We have a very amazing, awesomely negotiated system upgrade contract that's 10 years long. We know it's going to end in 2028. We're going to have to renew that and upgrade that. Next slide, please. This is the take-home slide. This is the slide, if you remember one thing that I present today, this is the most important slide out of this whole deck. We have about 6.5 million on reserve right now. And we've set aside funds because we're so lean, we don't have a lot of staff. So we shepherd budgets. If any of you knew my reputation when I was the Palo Alto fire chief, I had to cut about $9 or $10 million out of the fire department budget to keep the Stanford fire contract in play. So I'm used to running lean. So we run lean. We know a couple years out, we're going to have a couple of mile markers here where we're going to have to come up with several $1 million. The big one out here in kind of that 2030 to 2038 window is the big upgrade cost to upgrade a lot of the infrastructure and equipment. We think right now, roughly $50 million, give or take, is probably the total that we're going to need. My goal is to have at least half of that within the authority. So we can go out and get grants and we have funds to match those grants. So we can be aggressive in round two. Now, the board, the first generation of building this took a policy position, no debt. We are completely debt-free. We don't owe anything. We may have to revisit that in the board if we get in this 2035 and we haven't been as successful as we wanted in grants. We may have to fund some of those upgrades, but that's down the road. We just want to make sure that we are setting aside enough in our reserve funds that we can, do these upgrades that we have to do. Next slide, please. Here's the other thing that people frequently overlook. Even though I've talked about, okay, the original system was probably 90 million. To do a new system today is probably 175 million. All of your agencies have probably spent more than that on buying the radios. The radios cost more than the infrastructure, but here's why it's not a big deal. Because you're buying 10, 20 new radios a year. And when you see the budgets that come in front of you for communications, it might be a couple 100,000, but it's a couple 100,000 every year versus, hey, we need to come up with 26 million in 2030. So it's divided up over many years, but the radio costs are as, if not more expensive than the infrastructure cost over the course of the lifetime. And you may have gone through a couple of upgrades in your radios. So over that 20 or 25 years of the infrastructure, you might have rebought, let's say you had 1,000 radios in your organization. You might have bought 2,000 or 3,000 radios over the course of that lifetime of the radio system. So the radios are very expensive, which is why we wouldn't ever want to go out and build a new system that's not Motorola. When that decision was made in 2011 to award that contract to Motorola, we have a strategic partner. Next slide, please. So we did a strategic planning session with the board and the working committee last fall, and we really coalesced around this concept of a stair-step approach, maybe raise the budget in small increments every year to kind of capture more of that reserve funding. I heard loud and clear from my board members this year, hold a line on the budget, which we were able to do, but we are funding, and the board approved the budget 2 weeks ago. Instead of 10% set aside, we're setting aside 15% this year for our reserve funding. On a $5 million budget, a couple other $100,000 is not a whole lot, but I get it. It's you're paying the dues as members, and you're trying to balance many different things and have, $1,000 worth of ask and $500 to make it happen. So we're going to take a cautious approach on this stair-step approach. That's the sense I'm getting from our board. And then the board also said, hey, let's get out and do the roadshow. So we've spoken to the Police Chiefs Association, Fire Chiefs, City Managers Association. Mountain View invited us to present to their council a very similar presentation. We are available to come speak to your councils if you want a similar presentation. We're available for that as well, but we're going to take a cautious approach on that reserve funding. Next slide, please. So again, next steps, as I mentioned, we're doing the outreach, and we did build the first step into the budget. And then I think the last slide is just to circle back to the desired outcomes and questions. So authority's doing great work. We're really on the cutting edge of some of the technology that's out there. Our police officers, firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, utility workers, public works folks, they're getting some of the best technology that's out there. It's robust. It works when they need it. And really the support of all of you and your colleagues and your staff is really the reason why. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Eric, and thanks, Russ. I guess my question, I'll open up for questions or comments at the same time, but I'm curious, how can we support this reserve fund planning? Do you have specific things we can do to support the efforts?
So one of the slides that I didn't show in this one, it's in a longer presentation. It kind of breaks down the stair-step approach, and it breaks it down by each agency. And the way that we allocate our budget is we figure out the amount of money we need for next fiscal year. Then we figure out how many radios Los Altos is using. and let's say that is 1% of the total radios, that's your fee for the year. So I think that's why the JPA has been so successful, because an agency that's maybe using 100 radios is paying their fair share versus San Jose that's got 3,200 radios that is paying that proportion percent. So ideally, I would like to continue to advance that stair step approach of, instead of 15% reserve funding for next year, the year after that would be 25%. It gets a little scary when we get up into that 40 and 50% ratio. Now, some of our sister regional radio agencies, so the East Bay system, they set aside half of their operating budget for reserve. Now, they have some different requirements because they finance theirs, and that's some of the requirements. But I think the most support, so your colleagues are incredibly supportive. You know, what I've asked new board members to do when we onboard them is ask questions, because it is very technical. But probably the two biggest things is inform yourself about the work that the authority is doing, whether that's from me or your colleagues. So Jonathan is one of our alternates and had been a representative for the 3 Northwest cities. He was great. I'm glad to have him back. And then there's going to come a time where we are going to have to continue to set aside some more money. And while 15% isn't super uncomfortable, 25% might be in a budget.
I'll just jump in. I agree with everything Eric said. The other thing I would recommend is talk to your city managers, talk to your finance directors, and just let them know some inflation is coming from SV, not this year, but 12 months from now. It's just going to be a bigger incremental bill every year for the next X years while we build up the reserves. And the analogy I make very quickly is we see the same thing with water infrastructure, right? The water guys tell us we got to fix our infrastructure, expenses are coming, brace for impact.
Javed, Matthew, then Larry.
There's a lot of volunteers, CERT volunteers that work with the fire department, and then there's people who have ham radios. Are those radios the same ones that you guys have? These are the volunteers that are working as CERT members. And do you have any oversight over the CERT individuals, or would that be beneficial to get the CERT under your umbrella also?
So that is all handled by the individual agencies. We value this is my fire chief hat, value the CERT volunteers as part of the communication system. They're typically on a different frequency than our folks would be on. They're typically overseen by the individual community CERT programs, which are managed either by the police or the fire department. We don't have a tremendous amount of interaction with them.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out if it's worth it to get them into this interoperability umbrella also or not.
Well, typically the way that the communities handle it, so let's say there's been an activation of the city's EOC, most cities in the county have space set aside for the ham radio operators to use their equipment on their frequencies. And they're in direct communication with folks that are on our radio. The being able to patch a ham radio frequency to this technology, impossible. Plus, there's no security. Like we have to be really careful about cybersecurity. While nobody has hacked into the radio system and we have no direct link to the internet, there are documented cases, not in this county, thankfully, where 911 centers have been cyber hacked. Okay, so thank you. We have to follow like all these really crazy security protocols.
Yeah, quick comment on that. You know, in Montecito and Los Gatos, we have a very active CERT and emergency radio communications. And the point is when we do our drills. So we do our drills in the same room where the police radios are working. And they're the ones that are on this system. I mean, the other thing, just as I've learned about this, it's really advanced and really amazing. And you don't see it because it's something that will come into play in a relatively low frequency, but extremely high impact situation, like an earthquake or, you know, something bad like that, or a mutual aid incident where one town needs the help of the police department from another city. And so that's what this is preparing for. And that's, you know, exactly the issue that they had in New York City where they could not respond on the 9/11 because of those agencies not interoperating. So this has been a very wise investment, and you know, I can tell you the other people who get excited about it when I talk to them is our police chief. She's just like really thrilled that we have this, and they're the ones that are going to be using it probably the most.
I'll just jump in with a brief addition to that, because I agree with everything you said, Matt. On the morning of the VTA shooting, it's well understood that the first responders that went in were 2 San Jose PD and 2 deputy sheriffs from the county. And within 15 seconds, they were all talking to each other on the same channel. You know, obviously a very high stress situation. And that's a testament to the technology, but also, like I said before, our amazing dispatchers. And I've seen it in Sunnyvale. They showed me how this works, right? And they'll just drag 4 officers' names into a specific box that's a sub channel, and they're talking to each other county-wide.
And to take it to a different level, we've authorized almost 8,000 mutual aid cooperators from state and federal agencies. So let's go back to the morning of the VTA shooting. So we had FBI, ATF, were all patched in talking to our local police officers during the day. So all the dispatchers have to do is, as Russ said, but we've got a really great story of a commercial vehicle robbery in Milpitas. Truck was hauling millions of dollars worth of computer equipment. The truck was tracked to San Jose. So now we've got Milpitas PD, San Jose PD. Vehicle got on the freeway up 880. Now we've got CHP involved into Alameda County. Now we've got Alameda County law enforcement agencies. They ultimately apprehended the vehicle up by the Oakland Zoo. Everybody was talking to each other. Crazy. We couldn't do that 10 years ago.
That's awesome. Last question or comment from Larry.
Real quick, first, great to see the interoperability. I would love to see data, just so add a slide here back to us, showing the breakdown of fees per city and number of how that's broken down from an organizational standpoint. Secondly, it's not correct to tell us to go back to our budget directors to say, expect an increase from a year from now. The JPA should have a plan of, okay, here's a 3-year or 4-year goal of how that increase, much like Valley Water comes to us and says, it's going to be 9% for the next 10 years, 20 years now, with a potential increase or decrease after we get to certain points. That should be something that you're feeding our agencies or from a fee standpoint that you're giving back to us.
And I think that's where the board is going. I think the board wanted me to come out and do the presentation first, because what you mentioned, we've got those charts. But not for this presentation tonight. Happy to share with you about the agency breakdown, but we have talked about, look, here's the stair-step approach in years out, because the service contracts pretty well fixed, you know, our fees, our rates, everything else pretty well fixed. We do have that mapped out, but the board said, get out and do the roadshow. And then let's come back and we'll talk about that stair-step approach.
So lastly, as opposed to encumbering our cities, Super Bowl and FIFA is coming in 2 years. I would assume that your agency would be pushing the federal government to say, this is why this is needed, and wouldn't have us do the upgrades to pay for that upgrade or to look at that from a regional standpoint.
Staff is already talking about that. I'm actually going to Dallas in May with a couple of your staff from Santa Clara. The good news with that is I was here for Super Bowl 50 as the Palo Alto fire chief and was the president of the county chiefs that year. So we're already having these little jurisdictional, like San Francisco has stuck their nose way too far in, and it's like, it's not your event. It's our event, and it's the city of Santa Clara's event.
Good.
But we've already talked about how do we maximize both the earmark as well as grant funding around 2026.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I like the idea. I'm gonna have you go, because you never, yes, but yeah, I like the idea of trying to get others to pay for it, love that.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
we do too.
Yes, go ahead, Mayor Moyen.
So in Cupertino, we contract for sheriff services and a fire district. So, and we pay a huge amount and a huge increase every year for the contracts. So how do we know that we're not paying for this equipment through them and to you?
I can tell you that you are not paying it as the city of Cupertino. We do not send you an invoice, but you are paying it because we invoice the county. And so if you look at, there's probably a portion of your bill, or you could ask your county fire or your sheriff's representative, what portion of my bill is attributed to SVRA and radios? But you don't pay us directly.
So the county pays you and.
Correct.
County probably gets its money from us in some form.
You pay for it in your contract.
Factor
It's
that
a
into the
portion of
cost
it in your
of the
contract.
They factor
Absolutely.
into the-
But here's what's cool about it is even though you're paying your contract provider, Cupertino is still a member. And even though you're not paying us directly, you still have a policy voice on the board, which is great. So a lot of the West Valley cities, and this is certainly something for Los Altos Hills to consider if you were to become a member.
We need.
You would be a board member and you would be in a rotated seat, but so almost all the West Valley's cities except for Los Gatos, which has their own police department, they're all contracting, well, Montesreno, they're contracting for their services, but they're still members of the board. So you get the policy decision. Your money just gets there a different way. It goes through the sheriff and the county fire department.
Great question, Sheila. Thank you. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Charlene, any public comment online?
No public comment on this topic.
Okay, and with that, thank you again, Russ and Eric. Really appreciate it. We'll move to item number 5, which is the budget adoption, and we covered this the last meeting, so this is just a formality, but I'll have Shali do a quick overview. Go ahead, Shali.
Thank you. And if it's okay, I'm going to sort of cover the budget and the website at the same time. So the budget is pretty much the same as what I presented last month. But last month, the board directed staff to explore adding revision of website as a line item in the 2024-2025 budget and staff to obtain a cost estimate. So I did go and speak to a number of website designers, including Proud City, who hosts our website. And they all kind of asked me pretty much in different ways the same question. What is your goal for this website? Like, what do you want to do? And I didn't feel that I know what I would do personally, but I didn't feel like I could answer that because I haven't spoken to the board or the executive committee about it. So my recommendation, therefore, is that we form, or the executive committee recommends, hiring a website consultant and forming an ad hoc subcommittee to work on this, to kind of come up with what are our goals for the website. And then from there, it would be much easier to get a cost estimate because the range is 2,000 to about 10,000. And so what I decided to do for the budget, and this is one of the things that's different than you saw last month, I added a line item for $7,500. All of that is not for the consultant. I don't know what it would take to revamp the website, whether we need to buy like different software or whatever it is. So it's like consultant and any of these like ancillary costs. So that whole package I decided to put as $7,500. The other thing that you'll see different in the budget is one of our members wanted a line item for the reserves. And so what I decided to do is call it I can rename it if you'd like, but the in-year budget surplus, or if there is a surplus. And so that's what it would be. So you'll see that in the it's in your packet. So you'll see that also. Oh, and the insurance. Sorry. The other different thing that you'll see is that I actually have firm numbers for the insurance. So,
Which we'll cover actually in more detail in item 6, I think. But for item 5, so thank you, Shali. I just want to follow up on her mention of the website upgrade design subcommittee. The executive committee is recommending to the board to appoint 5 members, including Larry Klein, since he is first vice president, but also on the executive committee, and we wanted that nexus. So we're gonna look for a vote for 4 volunteers to serve on this committee. And it would basically be reviewing our current website and working with a consultant to figure out what upgrades, what do we need it to look like, what do we want it to look like, and then work with the broader board in finalizing that. And so the 2 action items right now that we're gonna open it up to the board members for are 1, to approve the budget, which we need to do tonight, and also to form this website design upgrade subcommittee that would consist of 5 people, including board members, including Larry. And so with both those items, any questions or comments? We're ready for a motion. It's 9:15, so we will start with the budget adoption. Oh, sorry. Move to approve the budget. Second by Vice Mayor Kamei.
I'm sorry, can you repeat who made the motion?
Sorry, Turner, move to approve.
Thank you. And seconded by
Vice Mayor Kamei.
Got it.
Let's do the roll.
Voice vote.
Voice vote. All in favor? Aye. Any objection? Any opposition? No. Any abstentions? The vote passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Public comment, any public comment? Shally, no one in the room. Any public comment?
No one online wants to make a comment.
Okay, and then the second item would be forming this subcommittee. We're looking for 4 volunteers, and Larry would head this committee, and it's really figuring out our website. You guys could come back to us next month and say, we're happy with the website, no work needs to be done, we don't need that $7,500.
Do we need to define the 4 volunteers now? Or can they come back to Shally afterwards?
No, we need to appoint them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just asking.
Come on, you want a name?
Yeah.
That's a
Yep.
great one, we have one, Mark. Javed, love this. Matthew,
Anyone else?
Kathy, all right. There was your
Does it have to be
How much time?
So we wanted an odd number, and we went between 3 and 5.
just an odd group?
How much time commitment? I was gonna make.
It won't be, in my guess, it'll be so we'll say, and when do we need to give feedback?
It's open-ended. I mean,
Okay.
there's no urgency to it.
Okay, you can count me.
Thank you.
Awesome.
It should be like maybe an hour a month, if that. It'll be a Zoom meeting and
Okay, count me.
it should be, okay.
Okay.
Happy to.
Thank
So we moved to form a Cities Association website upgrade design subcommittee consisting of Larry Klein as chair, Tina Walia, Mark Turner, Matthew Hudas, and Javed. Need a second?
Second.
Seconded by Turner.
Yep, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, who made the motion? I'm so sorry.
I made the motion and it was seconded by Turner. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, so next item, thank you. 6 JPA, Shally, this is Jani. Jani, I'm gonna turn it over to you. I think we have Alex online, who is our new CPA, and it's funny that we had SBRIA present earlier because Alex is also the CPA for SBRIA, so we have the attorney and the CPA for SBRIA also serving another Santa Clara County JPA. So Alex, we wanted to give you 2 minutes just to introduce yourself and thank you for being on our team.
Oh, hi everyone. My name is Alex Hom from Moss Lehman Hartsheim. I've been a CPA for about 15 years doing audits, and the partners here are pretty much around the same. And we're happy and to work with you guys, and hopefully we get you guys a clean audit.
We like hearing that. Any questions for Alex? Welcome to the team, Alex. Happy to have you. And thanks for
Thank you.
sticking with us till 9:20.
It's an interesting meeting you guys had tonight too. So
It
it was great. It was a
I
great listen.
enjoyed it. It was so interesting. I agree. Okay, and I'll do public comment at the end. So moving on to 6B, which is the insurance coverage, and this is back to you, Shally.
Thank you. So at our last meeting, the board had directed me to get a few questions answered by our SDRMA representative. And you'll see that I also included that in the staff report, but I can go over it very quickly. And Jenny, please correct me if I say anything inaccurate. Jenny and I had a meeting with our representative. The first question was, is the insurance coverage a package, or can you select different coverages to reduce the premium? They said, no, it's a package policy. You must obtain the entire package. However, this is the lowest available coverage that SDRMA is already offering us. So it's a minimum cost. And so therefore they can't get any lower than what they're asking. Can we increase our deductible and reduce the premium? That would require further underwriting approval. But she said it may not be worth it for us because generally the deductible would need to be in excess of $250,000 to actually make an impact on the cost for us. Who can access services / conferences offered by SDRMA and the California Special Districts Association? So so obviously anyone can go to CSDMA events and presumably pay your own way. But as far as the policy goes, it's the governing body members who represent the JPA. They can access the services, the conferences, and all the resources that SDRMA offers. So that's officials and officers of the JPA count as members of the governing body. So that would be all board members, all executive committee members, and just as a reminder, Council Member Wei is on the executive committee but not on the board. So I call that out separately. The Legislative Action Committee members, legal counsel, and the executive director when acting on behalf of the Cities Association JPA. It does not include employees of the member agencies. So for example, city staff from any one of the cities would not be included in this because as the representative said to us, the city is not joining as a member. The council member is considered the governing body, a member of the governing body. Okay. And she did say specifically, though all of the cities are members of the JPA, they're separate entities from the JPA. So you can still attend the events, but like I mentioned earlier, you would have to pay a different fee. And then finally, who is covered by the insurance coverage? And the liability policy covers the JPA's officers, employees, and volunteers. So we don't have employees and we don't have volunteers. So it's everyone on the governing body. It does not cover independent contractors such as myself, Janny, and Andrew. We have our own insurance. So, and it covers you if you're conducting JPA business. Okay. So there's a little bit more detail in the staff report. I don't know if you want me to go through that, but oh, and I just thought I would point out, I thought this was very nice. SDRMA does offer a $50 certificate to extend insurance to a third party. For example, if we hold a one-day event, we had to buy a certificate like that to have our holiday party in Mountain View, and it was a little bit more expensive than $50. So I thought that was nice. And now I should tell you, we did get our quote letter, which is also in your packet. The figure that they're giving us is $3,474. We would have to pay an additional $1,281 for annual membership in CSDA. And the 3-year term to stay with SDRMA, which we discussed last month, will begin with the first full fiscal year. So we would have to pay a prorated amount from now through June 30th. And just today I got an email from our representative saying how we would calculate the prorated amount. It would be $9.515, so almost $9.52 per day times the number of days. So since we're targeting April 22nd as the first day of insurance, April 22nd to June 30th is 70 days. And so that multiplied by 9.515 comes out to $666.05.
Thank you.
Sure. And they don't have the rates yet for the next fiscal year yet.
Thank you. Love the precision and great overview. And of course, we came under budget based on the range we had given you at the last meeting, so thank you. Any questions for Shali on the insurance? And this is one of the last pieces for us to really formalize the JPA. Any questions or comments on the insurance?
I have a question. Go ahead, Carmen. So, thinking about the previous, legal mishaps, does this insurance cover legal fees?
Did you hear that, Jenny?
For board
I did
members?
hear that. You know, I would have to check in with them to see if that is included in the coverage. And I can do that and send a memo out.
And that includes the CEO, staff, or is it just for board members?
Well, I think it would just be board members because we don't have staff.
So, yeah.
Like, no, we don't have employees. And please correct me if I'm wrong, Janny.
No, you're correct.
So it'd be a different kind of coverage then. But good question, Carmen. Any other questions or comments on the insurance?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Charlie, I didn't hear you mention alternates and I didn't see in the packet. I'm just wondering if that's included.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I missed it.
Are alternates included under board
Oh.
member?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I should have been more clear in the staff report, but yes.
Any more questions, comments? If not, any public comment online, Shali?
Nope.
Okay, so with that, I will look for a motion to adopt the resolution, and then we also need a second motion to authorize the president to execute the amendment to the JPA for the SDRRMA. So,
Two
motion?
motions, or can it be all in one?
It
Go
can,
into one, Jen.
it can be all in one, and one thing I just thought of with respect to the resolution, maybe add waive the reading of the title.
We have to do, yeah. Go ahead.
So moved.
Yep. Do you have a second?
Second by Klein.
Okay, so I'm gonna give it to Mayor Mock. So motion made by Turner, seconded by Mock. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously. Thank
Great.
you.
Yay.
Okay, next we'll move to LAC update, and this is our first LAC update where I know our chair has a couple letters for us to discuss. So again, please bear with us. This is a key part of what we do as a cities association.
Thank you. That snuck up on me very quickly. Thank you, Lisa, for, I'm organized.
And while the chair Walia gets you ready, I was gonna say, Margaret has graciously agreed for the second time to continue her item to the next meeting, in light of the time. So Shali, let's put Margaret after President's update next meeting.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, I'm ready. So, at the LAC meeting today evening, it was a very robust, conversation and meeting. I'll quickly mention, we had a guest speaker. We had Senator Josh Becker, who came in and spoke about his legislative priorities. And prior to that, the key thing was there was a list of bills that had been included in the Legislative Action Committee packet that are also in the board packet. So the committee was able to go through the first 4 bills, and I can go through them in a moment. The SD 1164 from Newman on revenue and taxation. The committee reached a point where they wanted to wait and watch. I'm happy to share more specifics if somebody is interested. AB 2814 by Assemblymember Evan Lowe, his bill that he mentioned a month ago at the LAC meeting is addressing porch theft that the committee recommended that we support, this board supports. The third one was AB 1820 by Xiao. This is on the housing development projects, the pre-applications, the preliminary applications that come in that we would be required if this were to become law, to provide all the specific fees and exactions with an itemized list. And there is more to it. I can touch upon that. The committee recommended that we oppose unless amended. And the fourth bill that we discussed in detail is AB 1886 from Alvarez. That is the housing element law, which talks about substantial compliance under the Housing Accountability Act. And that the committee recommended that we oppose. So those are the four bills, the first four bills in our list. So Nisa, how would you want me to focus on each one?
So let's do one at a time, see if anybody has questions or comments, and then we vote.
Okay, so the first one is SB 1164 from Newman. This was the one where the committee recommended that we watch on this. The comments were in two different directions. This is about new ADU construction, and this would exempt the property tax reassessment for 15 years or when the property changes hands. And different committee members, some felt we should oppose this because this could impact the revenues for the cities, whereas some other members felt don't have specific information, what's the dollar amount impact. There could also be a Prop 13 impact. For example, an ADU could be costing $1 million today, whereas under Prop 13, the property tax for the property may be very low. So bottom line, no consensus reached and it was at watch.
Questions, comments on that bill? Any recommendation or motion to take a different position?
Just a question. So this would clearly have an impact on city finances, right?
It could.
Yes.
Why do you say it could? As
The-
opposed to it will?
Well, Cal Cities believes it will, and that is why Cal Cities has written a letter of opposition on this. The committee had different members of the committee had differing viewpoints. You have a person sitting right next to you who was very clear about opposing this because I'm quickly skimming notes. We had a very robust discussion. There are others here who had different opinions. So that's why I'm not saying bill.
That's fine. So what does that mean then? If they have, what is our response?
We vote, so we are the ones, they can only recommend to us.
So the Legislative Action Committee is recommending that we don't oppose or support. We just watch to see how this bill evolves.
It is something we can take a position on down the road.
Yes,
And we could,
will
we
always come
could, we
back.
could immediately take a position tonight, but.
Right, we
but
don't have to
as-
go with
a-
a lot.
As a body, normally, we evaluate the recommendations. Usually we normally only take action if they're asking to oppose or support a bill. The watch is.
We follow along with the watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's enough pros and cons on both sides. On one side, you've got a danger that the property tax might go up with considerable amount. And the city will get that additional revenue, but on the other side, you've got seniors who've been living on that house forever. And now they build an ADU and they get stuck with excess tax. So
Okay.
abstain is probably
So
good.
it looks like everybody's comfortable with the watch position, so the next one.
Okay, thanks. The next one was fairly straightforward and unanimous. That is Assemblymember Evan Lowe's bill, which is about unlawful entry with the intent to commit package theft. His approach, he had come to the LAC meeting a month ago, and he presented this bill and saying this would specifically address issues that is an issue that is being faced in every single city across in our county because Santa Clara County has a very high rate of package delivery. We do online orders a lot and so this would help us address that. And every single committee member, we did not have too much discussion on this because this was a pretty straightforward. Even the one who originally tentatively was leaning towards abstaining, basically said yes, all 11 members tonight supported this.
Questions, comments? If not, a motion to approve the recommendation.
I would so move.
Moved by Kamei,
Second by Klein.
seconded by Klein. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition or abstentions? No, it passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you. So I will, I just want to mention to some of the board members who are not there in LAC. The process is at this point, once we have votes tonight in this meeting, Nisa as board president and myself as LAC chair, we will work with Shali to formalize some letters of position. Position is taken by this board, not by LAC. And then we will send the position letters to the appropriate committees. So the goal is to get our voices heard early in the legislative process. There have been changes that are being made literally as we speak. In fact, the next two were being discussed yesterday and there were changes made. And I was fortunate to be able to reach a Cal Cities person today to get the latest update on that. So that takes me to bill number 3 that we discussed, AB 1820. Which is the fees that I talked about. And where we finally landed was that the LAC committee recommended to the board to oppose this bill unless amended. And the motion was that pretty much adopt the Cal Cities letter position with one minor change. And the requested changes by Cal Cities were, let me pause for a second. Yesterday, the committee agreed, the Assembly Housing and Community Development Committee yesterday passed this with one amendment. The original timeline was 10 days to provide the fees, the exact fees. They agreed to shift, to change that from 10 to 20 days. And Cal Cities is asking the timeline to be moved to 45 days. And the LAC committee recommends 30 days. So 3 changes being requested. Extend timeline to 30 days, only applies to standardized general fees. And thirdly, it is non-binding estimates on prelim application. The background being prelim application, project scope can change. There's a lot that is unknown. There could be CEQA, so on and so forth. It could take months to years, just even in the design stage and approval stage, not to mention construction. So that's the reasoning. So 3 proposed changes, 30 days, only standardized general fees and non-binding estimates on prelim application. And this was this unanimous? No, there was 1 no. And I assumed 10 yeses. Or 11 yeses?
There are 11 of them.
I can check if you want.
Yeah, I'm seeing 1 no here and I'm losing my count at this time.
And it's okay.
Okay,
No, it
fine.
passed.
It passed almost unanimous, almost.
Yeah, it was 10 yeses and 1 no.
Okay, great. So
Questions, comments on this bill or a motion to approve the recommendation?
Motion to
Or to
approve.
oppose, you don't have to, yeah. We have a motion
Recommendation.
by Kathy Watanabe. Any second?
Second by Klein.
Second by Klein, and so we'll do the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstention? 1 from Los Altos.
Oh, thank you. Oh, you are abstaining? Oh, so 1 abstention, Shali from Los Altos.
I got it.
Okay, thanks, because I didn't. Thanks for pointing out. Okay, I'm prepping the next one, the last one that we discussed, AB 1886. This is the housing element law, which in simple words, this would end the current self-certification of housing element. And we had a pretty robust discussion on this. This was also in the housing committee, the Assembly's Housing Committee yesterday. It was passed by them and is now headed to the local government committee. Cal Cities testified on this as well, opposing the bill. And most housing groups support this bill. The LAC committee itself was fairly split on this. They had two different perspectives. Some felt that the courts are anyway headed in that direction. This would give this would just move along in with that. And there are some other bills to look at. But finally, the vote was
6-4-1.
6-4-1.
6-4.
6-4-1. 6-4 opposing this and 4.
Chair Walia, it was 6 were yes, 4 were no, and 2 abstentions.
That's what I was thinking, 6-4-2, because by that time we had the 12th person.
But
You
six-
voted on the other person.
That was 5 minutes.
Can you clarify 6 to do what?
Oppose.
Thank you.
Yeah, the recommendation was to oppose the bill. And this was an interesting.
And the motion had one additional part to it.
That's what I'm trying to find. Thank
Go
you.
ahead, Javed.
Thank you, Javed. Why don't you tell
Yeah,
us?
so the motion was to oppose it and also to recommend to the legislature that they need to put some pressure on the HCD to approve the housing elements more efficiently.
Okay, I found that sheet of
I
paper.
will include that in the letter if it's approved today.
Yeah. So his motion was to oppose the bill and to call on the legislature to place restrictions on HCD. So, so it certifies the housing element in a timely manner. Because this whole bill is related to HCD. Yeah. So that was Javed's motion. I did find it.
And so if the board makes a motion to approve the recommendation, you're incorporating the motion from LAC. So that's why it was important that Javed included it. So question, comments, motion, either approving or amending the motion from the recommendation from LAC. Motion to approve the recommendation or to amend. Okay, so we have a motion, Carmen, Montana.
Second, Watanabe.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, all in favor? Oh,
Sorry.
oh, did you have a question?
Yeah, just very quickly, I was wondering in terms of those who were saying that there's a way, the courts are already moving in that direction. So those were wanting to see it move forward, or I was just curious as to what that discussion was.
So Vice Mayor Fruin had said that the courts are moving in that direction. However, this bill would actually put more limits on HCD than what the courts are giving HCD right now.
And he thought it was too much restriction.
No, JR said courts
Sergio.
give more power to HCD currently
Right.
than this legislation gives them. His motion that was the first motion, and the second motion got voted and got approved. His motion never got voted on, though it did get a second. JR's motion was to support this if amended by removing all provisions that are related to builder's remedy. Because this brings in builder's remedy and Javed's motion that got voted and approved or recommended to this board was very clear that this is about HCD, this is about our housing elements, and this is about taking away self-certification, and this is about builder's remedy. Precisely the points that Cal City's letter hits. And so he felt clearly, let's suppose it is our opportunity as cities to let our voices be heard by the legislature that you are taking away our local control. That was the gist of it. Am I correct?
No, that is very correct.
Second.
Yep.
Correct.
So is there a motion to approve the recommendation?
Yeah, Carmen made the motion, Kathy Watanabe seconded the motion.
And then all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay.
I'm gonna abstain too. So 2 abstentions, 0 opposition, and then everybody else supported.
Great, thank you. Got it.
Sergio Lopez left, Shali.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So he left before any of these 4? Or he left in the middle, I forget.
I think he left. So let's see what our general counsel has to say. Go ahead, Jani.
It's more a question of how you would like that reflected, the abstentions. I know we're getting ready to do the bylaws, but how do you want the abstentions?
So as of right now, because we haven't changed the bylaws, we'll just continue to do it the way we have, which we don't reflect the vote.
Thank you.
Okay.
But Sergio, do we know when?
Just look at it. Look at it after, look at the tape after when he was leaving.
He left at 9:40. So,
Oh, you know that? Oh, okay, great.
yeah, I checked. I looked at my thing.
Okay, but
No,
thanks.
Chair Walia, thank you. That was very
thanks.
helpful, and next week it's City Leader Summit, so it's great going in saying, these are our positions.
Yeah, and thank you, that meeting ran a little bit, but that was
Oh
my
no,
goal.
this has been a long meeting, but a productive meeting, so thank you. We don't have an item 8, thanks to Margaret. We don't have an item 9 because Gabe isn't here. Let's check in with Shali to see if she has an executive director's update.
Just one simple thing. I submitted the final JPA form. So, that's yay.
Thank you. Last item, Joyce challenges and add announcements in case anybody has any announcements, and we'll quickly, you can say no, but I'll just go around the room, starting with Rosemary. Sheila?
Housing element got approved yesterday.
John?
Just as a point check out, our, this Tuesday, Montesino is going to formally review the JPA bylaws. They've kind of looked at it, but the council hasn't had a chance to look at it. So I'll give you my feedback on this tomorrow, I guess.
Go ahead, you're past the deadline, but go ahead and submit when you can. Carmen?
No, I don't. Oh, just a recommendation that you guys create name cards like we've had in the past. You know, with our city, with our city on
Yeah,
it.
no, great idea. Yeah. We still have those.
Yeah.
Some of you are still.
I know.
Well,
People that
Yeah,
come,
I actually have a meeting at 10 o'clock tomorrow with one of our favorite former vice mayors of San Jose, Chappie Jones. It's their role as a lobbyist, so I'm gonna have to put it down on my
He's the new
calendar. Yes, so I'm looking forward to that. And next week, well, I'm leaving Sunday and I'll be there till Thursday, going to Washington DC as part of the legislative committee, the federal committee that on regarding the Northern California Power Agency. And looking forward to that and meeting with our legislators and talking about, you know, our advocating for the important things, not just for NCPA, but for Santa Clara and the other agencies that are part of NCPA. And I just have to say, the last time I was able to go 2 years ago, one of the highlights of the trip was having a meeting with Dianne Feinstein.
Oh.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what I'm looking forward to the trip.
I just want to thank everybody for being here today. Sorry we went late, and unless you want to tour after this, which I don't think any of you want to stay later, please come by on Saturday, April 20th, Earth Day. We'll have tours of the building. We'll have the official ribbon cutting for the outside ground. So opening up the 6 acres of open space. So you can't see it in the dark, but there's an amphitheater. There will be music and food trucks and lots of things happening on Earth Day all around this campus. So Saturday, April 20th from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., ribbon cutting at noon.
Awesome.
Happy Earth Day to everyone. And a very big thank you to especially the ones who have been here since 5:30. That was a very busy, robust meeting. And thank you for all your support for that. And a big thank you to Mayor Klein for the use of this fabulous building.
Matthew?
I'm gonna do a thank you, which is thank you for experiencing this wonderful building. I will share a challenge from Los Gatos. We have somewhere between 12 and 14 builder's remedy applications.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
Amazing.
I just want to say, if we were in Los Altos, I wouldn't be getting home until 10:40. So now I'll be.
Charlie, I think we're not gonna do that August Morgan Hill.
Experience the drive, believe me. And then second, can we get the slides from BAFA?
Yes, yeah,
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just thank you to Larry and the city of Sunnyvale for this introduction. It's been totally wonderful. I've never seen anything like it. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to Larry. And I was just talking with Mark. We used to meet in Sunnyvale every month. I forget why that changed, but
I'd like to make
just
a
putting
motion.
it out there.
That
We
changed
can
because
start
of,
in December.
that changed because of COVID, if I remember.
Wow.
That
COVID's
we-
over.
that coming out of COVID, we just, yeah.
The
We'll
other thing.
start it again in December.
There you go.
The other thing I wanted to bring up, I was asked to, by my city manager to bring this up last month. Gabe mentioned it as part of the city managers association report, but the issue of transport, ambulance transport is heating up. And as you all probably are aware, there's a shortage of ambulances. Rural Metro is a private company that provides all of the ambulance service for the entire county. By law, it has to be one entity, but they have been having a shortage. So a lot of our cities are having to get into the transport service and buy ambulances and provide the service, and we're not getting reimbursed for them, whereas the county or AMR does, they bill the patient. So this contract with AMR has been continuously getting extended. But it was 2010 was the original contract, and now we're at 2024. Next Wednesday at the Board of Supervisors meeting, there's a recommendation to extend it once again for 18 months with two one-year extensions. But there's been interest by many of our cities to find different models. Perhaps I know San Jose has been interested in getting into it. Our city's looking at it. So perhaps the 18 months will give us the time to look at whether other models are available. But my city managers was called into a meeting today with the county executive about it, and she suggested, and I agree, it would be great if we could have a presentation maybe at our next meeting, and because they would like for the elected officials to get involved in this issue. Coincidentally, this was one of my first issues when I got elected. My dad was sick and I called 911 several times my first year. And I had at one point 9 firefighters and paramedics in my living room. And then I got billed $3,500 to take him 5 minutes to El Camino Hospital. So I did this huge research and now I know all about this issue, and I've been waiting 15 years to deal with this. So I'm kind of excited about this opportunity, but yeah, if we could maybe have a presentation, that would be great.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
Because the city of San Jose, our fire department actually is going through a whole assessment of different models of being able to provide some of the services
Yes.
because of the impact to the fire department when the ambulance don't show up.
Yeah.
So I think that's gonna be very interesting.
So yes, I think that would be a great topic, and we can talk to Shali about speakers and who we can invite. Steve?
And just to add on that, Margaret's right, there was a meeting with the county executive and a number of city managers were there, including, and Lee was there. And I think everybody felt real good about the meeting. So I think a presentation after the board meeting Tuesday, when I think they have to extend because of the timing, there's no alternative, because you have to have a contract for services, but there are alternate methods being looked at, et cetera.
And we'll get the breathing room to do it. Okay, so we'll work, Shali, with Steve.
Yeah.
And we're gonna figure out a speaker, but I think that's a great idea and very timely. Yeah. And we'll try to make a much lighter agenda for next month. Thank you again. Thank you, everybody.
Are we officially adjourned?
Oh, yes, thank you, Victoria. Yes.
Only 5 minutes, so.
Yes, meeting adjourned. So 9:57.